meeting number 27 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to the order of reference of March 8, 2021, the committee is meeting to study Bill C-14, an act to implement certain provisions of the economic statement tabled in Parliament on November 30th, 2020, and other measures. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25, 21, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, so that you are aware the website will always show the person speaking rather than the totality of the committee. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants, witnesses, and members that screenshots or taking photos of your screens is not permitted under parliamentary rules. Before we go to the witnesses, as the committee knows, the subcommittee on agenda and procedure met on Monday. There was a report sent out to committee members, and I would like to make actually a couple of changes on that report, if we could. On section, I will read it and make the changes as we go. One, that with respect to Bill C-14, an act to implement certain provisions of the economic statement tabled in Parliament on November 30th, 2020, and other measures. A, the committee invite witnesses to appear on the bill on Wednesday, March 17th, 2021, from 2:30 to 5:30, on Thursday, March 18th, from 10 to 1, and if required during other meetings before Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. That the committee proceed with clause-by-clause consideration of the bill no later than Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021 at 4 p.m. It says at 3:30, so that would be an amendment at 4. Amendments be submitted to the clerk of the committee in both official languages no later than 12 p.m. on Monday, March 22nd, 2021. The clerk of the committee write immediately to each member who is not a member of a caucus represented on the committee, and any independent members, to inform them of the study of the bill by the committee, and to invite them to prepare and submit any proposed amendments to the bill which they would suggest that the committee consider during the clause-by-clause study of the bill. The clerk should also outline all of the parameters and deadlines mentioned in paragraphs A to C of this motion. Point 2, that the committee hold a 90-minute panel of witnesses on COVID-19 expenses. It says COVID-10 there, so that should say COVID-19 expenses study on March 25th, 2021, followed by a 30-minute discussion on committee business to study various motions on notices. And those motions are mentioned. 3 motions from Gabriel St. Marie, routine motions, 1 motion from Peter Julian on tax evasion, and 1 motion from Julie Zero, which should say interprovincial trade barriers. It says tax barriers, so a slight amendment there, probably due to me being on PEI and people don't understand my island accent anymore. Point 3, that the committee hold a meeting to study the main estimates and invite the Minister of Finance and senior officials. Point 4, that the subcommittee hold its next meeting on Monday, March 29th, 2021, or Wednesday, March 23rd, 2021, March 31st, 2021, to discuss committee business. So with those slight amendments, does somebody want to move the motion?
Oui, je peux la proposer.
Moved by...
I can do that.
Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Oops, sorry, Peter, did you want?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just the last part about the steering committee, I thought that we were meeting after the discussion of the motions next Thursday. So a week this Thursday. And so it was the following Monday, which I think is the 31st, but you mentioned a number of dates, and I'm not sure if I misunderstood you or whether you clarify.
What we were going to discuss at the meeting on March 25th in the last half hour was those motions, the ones from Gabriel St. Marie, yours, and the one from Julie Zerowich, to see what we do with those motions. And then we would have a steering committee meeting or subcommittee meeting on Monday, March 29th or
Okay.
Wednesday, March 31st.
Okay, good. Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So moved. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Great. Thank you all. We shall now turn to witnesses. And before we get into witnesses, I'll give you the lineup for speaking for questions. First will be Mr. Kelly, followed by Ms. Kotrakis, then Mr. St. Marie and Mr. Julian. So turning to the witnesses, welcome all. Sorry for taking a little time with that procedure, which gets us to where we want to go, I guess. So turning first to the Quebec Chamber of Commerce, Charles Milliard, President and CEO, and Mr. Levine, Senior Consultant. I believe you're on, Mr. Milliard.
Yep.
Should I go
on? Okay,
yep.
Excellent.
You can hold it to about 5 minutes. It'd be great. Around 5 minutes.
I'll do my best. Alors, bonjour à tous.
Good day, everyone. Happy St. Paddy's Day to everyone. My name is Charles Millard. I am the CEO of the Fédération des Chambres du Commerce du Québec, FCCQ. It's an organization that brings together 130 chambers of commerce and 1,100 corporate members representing more than 50,000 businesses. We operate in all sectors of the economy and throughout Quebec. I thank you for inviting us to testify on Bill C-14 in the wake of the November 30th economic statement. The FCCQ welcomed many of the measures announced in this budget update. These include the increase in the wage subsidy rate and its extension until March 13 and more recently until June 5th. Significant investments in infrastructure, including major airports. That is commendable. Today, we would like to focus our comments on the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy and add a few editorial comments, if you will, on the tourism and pharmaceutical industries. The Government of Canada has created several excellent programs that are having a major impact on the ability of individuals and businesses to weather the current crisis. Among these, the Canada Emergency Rent Assistance Program that was set up quite quickly and addressed a real issue. The challenge for commercial tenants in paying their rent due to health restrictions. However, problems quickly arose because we heard about this at our federation because it was the actual building owners who had to file their applications themselves. This proved to be ill-suited to the crisis context we're in, which complicated relations between many tenants and landlords, limiting the appeal of the program. For example, according to a survey conducted by Restaurants Canada, 1 in 5 restaurant owners were not allowed by their landlords to defer rent during the first wave of COVID-19. That was a requirement under this particular program. So it was imperative to modify the program. Thankfully, the new subsidy addresses this challenge by providing financial assistance directly to corporate tenants. The subsidy rate, it should be pointed out, is also a positive, up to 90% for business. It's much appreciated. It's major. However, it is unacceptable in our minds to deprive companies that have not been able to benefit from the program because of its particular setup, whereas they should have been entitled to it since March 2020. So the Federation recommends that commercial tenants be allowed to access the program for all the months during which they would have been eligible since the beginning of the crisis and for which they have not been able to receive these amounts. We know, and you know as well as we do, that government programs are rarely retroactive, and that's fine, but this is an exceptional circumstance. Let's be clear. Thousands of contractors were eligible, but were unable to take advantage of the program for reasons that were completely beyond their control. In this case, retroactivity would rectify the injustice experienced by far too many small business owners in Quebec and throughout the rest of Canada. On another note, the FCCQ is pleased with the assistance announced during the economic statement for workers in the events and arts sectors. And I know I have colleagues that will be speaking to that point a little later. But I would point out that Quebec's major hotels have basically seen their clientele of international travelers and conventioneers virtually disappear since March. For us, this is an important sector of tourist accommodation and is often left out in the current crisis. Unfortunately, for the moment, the assistance promised by Ottawa is limited to loans, whereas it is clear to us that there is a need for direct assistance for hotel owners and tourism businesses alike. I'll close by addressing the issue of the pharmaceutical industry. Bill C-14 includes certain provisions aimed at preventing and mitigating shortages of therapeutic products, including drugs and medical equipment. I think it's a great opportunity now to recall the importance of the health and life sciences sector and the role of the government in ensuring its development. Even before the pandemic, our federation recommended investing in the existing pharmaceutical infrastructure in Quebec and Canada. The federal government can and must play an important role in this regard. Support for local production by manufacturers, support for the increase of essential drug supplies, prompt review of the proposed Patent and Medicine Prices Review Board. The crisis has revealed the importance of having a strong pharmaceutical industry here in Quebec and in Canada. You have the opportunity here to make it right. In conclusion, the Federation recommends the adoption of Bill C-14 while reiterating the relevance of making the rent subsidy retroactive for entrepreneurs who were unable to obtain the funding. I am now looking forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Millar. Turning then to the Pi Bowman School for Ballet and Creative Movement, Ms. Bowman, Artistic Director and Founder.
Thank you. So my name is Pia Baumann.
Pia.
And thank you. And so thank you for this opportunity. And I would like to really begin by expressing my admiration and thanks to the government, the federal government of Canada during this COVID time. It has been often a saving grace for this school. I would like to point out a few facts about the school. Founded by me in 1979, it was granted charitable not-for-profit status in 1987. On a compelling mandate, which says that any child who wishes to learn dance, any child who wishes to create dance, and any child who wishes to perform dance should be given the chance to do so in a safe and professional environment. This mandate enabled us to have a very sizable bursary program, which enabled children from socioeconomic challenged situations to express their wish to dance and to give them any chance to do so. Taking part in the full program or just a small part of the program that we give. Pia Baumann School gives a full classical dance education. We follow our Royal Academy of Dance to children and youth 6 to 17 years old. Since its inception, hundreds of children and youth aged 6 to 17 have enjoyed dancing, learning, goal setting, and were successful in their pursuits. Pia Baumann School is also a hub where professional dancers hone their art, visual artists show their work, and musicians practice, and independent theater develops their works, rehearses, and performs in our studio theater. We had a presence of 40 years in Toronto's West End Parkdale, a socioeconomically challenged area. In 2016, Pia Baumann School had to move. We renovated on 2025 Sterling Road. We built 4 studios inside a large space. Again, with the possibility of a theater theatres are a much needed facility in the city of Toronto. From September 2020 till now, the school, like all schools, was closed for extended periods. Dreams were lost. A safe home away from home was lost. There's no financial compensation for this loss of one's love for dance in a young person's life. I am dealing at the moment with at least 3 students with serious mental and emotional depressed situations. PBS was not able to finish its studio theatre because of the school having to close, the loss of income, and not being able to pursue the further building. The revenues PBS receives through rentals of its studios and theatre for productions accounts for a large part of our income and is an essential part of our revenue to help cover our substantial rent. The school closed its doors. Most office staff was laid off. That means contract teachers and accompanists were temporarily laid off. A harsh situation for people I feel deeply responsible for. People who hold MAs in dance, in music, and art. In April 2020, the Zoom classes entered our lives, a new way of teaching. But in order to keep teachers' income below the maximum allowed, if they received CEWS, the number of teaching hours was greatly reduced so as not to exceed $1,000. PBS, the school, lost income. 2019 to 2020, in that period, we were obliged to refund class fees to students who could not commit to Zoom classes in their already very stressed and complicated lives. In the current school year, starting September 2021 to now, we have less than half of our normal student population. PBS lost income that we would have received from rentals, from performance companies that would rent our spaces, and individual artists that find our studio space a place for incubation and development of their works. So the point I'm trying to make here is that it is not just a school, but it is an entire population intertwined with arts in all different forms that is greatly, seriously affected by this pandemic. Pia Baumann School received $60,000 through SIBA, which was a saving grace. Our landlord has not given us any reprieve, and our rent in the center of Toronto, a bit on the West End, is sky high. SIBA was incredible. It helps us through this period to some extent. We received $40,000 in April, and just this past March, we received another $20,000. The catch for the school is that we need to pay this amount back by December 2022. Not only do we have to pay this back, so we will have, if we make this, a debt of $50,000. We have a rental theater space that would possibly bring in and support our presence in the city that we cannot use because it is not finished. It requires money to finish it. We have to rebuild our student population. Currently, the student population is less than half. Our parents have serious fears for their children. The fears are transplanted on their children, specifically the teenagers aged 12 to 17. Not only do these children, these youth, not only have they lost that possibility to express themselves through dance, to learn, to enrich themselves with music and personal expression, they've lost a dream. I have to point out that this dream, this existence of the arts in general, has disappeared from our lives. It only takes all of you a glance at the papers to see that arts is not represented. How can any student who studies art, who loves art, how can they continue to believe that art would be an important part of their life if it is not a voice around them, listened to, seen as pictures? This is a very serious concern of mine. When we reach the end of the pandemic and Pia Bauman's school looks at its debt, I know how much support we need to be able to keep this school, which is unique. It is the only school that is a charitable not-for-profit organization and enables children to dance. If this school is lost, there is a lot lost for all of us, for our children. It frightens me, it worries me. Obviously, I am more than involved as an artist, as a choreographer, as a teacher, in all these issues. I have given just a small little graph, not a graph, just sort of a picture. A normal year from September 2019 to March 2020, the income of the school, so it was not a full school year, was over $600,000. The income we have now for the same period is a third of that. In rental fees from artists, theater companies, professional artists, we did receive in the previous period over $30,000. To date, it is $7,000. The bursary support we received from foundations and institutions and very generous individuals. Over the past so many years, it has been always between $25,000 and $30,000, which gives as full a dance education as any child could wish, or just a little bit as any child could wish. To date, it is nothing, because the foundation that supported us says, we do not know how this will go. So no revenue for our dancers, and for many, another dream lost. So I'd like to say, to end with my last observation, for our children and youth, dance and theater and live music disappeared from their lives since the onset of the pandemic. In order to learn to appreciate the voices of art and music, one must hear and see the voices to be able to learn it, that it is an expression. And history has told us that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pia. Turning then to the festivals and major events Canada, Martin Waugh, Executive Director. Martin, floor is yours. Welcome back.
Bonjour, merci, monsieur.
Good day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. FAME and Rémi represent over 500 festivals and events in Canada through direct and affiliate memberships in a sector of the tourism and cultural industry that on its own generates over $1 billion for the country's GDP year after year. Today I will be speaking to you about Bill C-14, the implementation of the Fall Economic Statement, as well as FAME's presentation of a new 3-step roadmap to recovery for this sector of festival and events. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the work you've done here in pre-budget consultations. Recommendation 55 in your report is something we're very pleased with, and we very much hope that the government will take it up in its entirety. The first phase of our roadmap corresponds to basically a survival phase that we are still in, where festival and events are deprived of the opportunity to bring people together and generate independent revenues, which generally represent more than 80 to 85% of the financial envelope, the rest being grants from cities, provinces, and the Canadian government. It is primarily through the emergency wage subsidy that you can really help us achieve the first step of the plan, which is to keep the teams together and the expertise alive. We understand that this program is very expensive for taxpayers. That said, we caution elected officials who would want to end it too soon or opt for declining support. If choices have to be made, we believe that we should continue to support perhaps fewer businesses, but at a high rate, keeping eligible only those that continue to be most affected in the tourism and cultural sectors, for example, where revenue losses can be as high as 100%. We believe that the wage subsidy will be necessary, vital even, until we fully recover our business models, likely in the first or second quarter of 2022. I also stress the importance of thinking about the hyper-seasonality of festival activities and revenues to keep them eligible vis-a-vis the reference periods, etc. Also related to this stage of the plan, we stress the importance of maintaining regular grants, which are in essence the lifeline of festivals and events, and now account for almost all revenues. As for the emergency rent grant or assistance subsidy, it is an interesting complement for festival and events, but not at the same level for everyone. On the one hand, we have small festivals that are managed from a small office, and on the other hand, we have large institutions like TIFF in Toronto or the National Bank Open, the former Rogers Cup, which have large facilities that are very costly to maintain and which may exceed the maximum threshold. The second phase of our roadmap is about public health and getting back on track. We need to instill confidence in Canadians. We are asking government to facilitate a discussion between festivals and public health branches across Canada to see what can be done this summer. We need to do this soon and know within the next month or so what framework we can operate within in June, July, and August. Events can soon be organized. They will not necessarily be profitable, nor will they be able to operate with the same capacity, but they will be organized in a safe manner from a health standpoint. For example, outdoor amphitheaters with facilities that force distancing are possible. We have solutions for just about every problem you may think of. These need to be discussed. The federal government can play a role by supporting test concerts, for example. This summer, the cancellation of events altogether or putting in place capacity limits that don't take into account the capacity of the organizers, for example, limits of 250 people, would be a form of intellectual laziness on the part of authorities. The third phase of our plan is to stimulate tourism and economic recovery by reviving festivals and events. Like you, we recommend introducing a new program modeled on the Marquee Tourism Events Program, which was introduced after the 2008 crisis, and funding it with $225 million over 3 years. We know that festival goers spend a third of their money on food and a quarter on hotels, so there will be a trickle-down effect to other sectors that would be very affected, not to mention the artists, musicians, and the entire ecosystem, including stage and technical equipment suppliers. We believe that this program should be managed by the regional economic development agencies in collaboration with Canadian Heritage. Not all festivals are recognized as cultural, but they all have an economic and tourism impact. Whether it's sporting events, fireworks festivals, or culinary or wine festivals, for example, that is a common denominator. In closing, I would add that there is an important social dimension to our project. Canadians will want to get together after this crisis. People will need to heal. They'll need social healing, and that's why we are proposing to call the program Celebrating Together Again. Thank you for your support.
Wayne, vous êtes en sourdine.
Wayne, you're on mute.
Thank you, Gabriel. Beth Potter is next. I'm not sure. There she is. Miss Potter is President and Chief Executive Director for the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. Welcome, Beth. The floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président et chers membres du...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for inviting us here today to share the priorities of our industry.
Trouble hearing the translation. I wonder, can you perhaps lower your mic a little? And it's coming through as garbled, and I expect translators are having trouble. Try it there again.
Is it possible that she's also not toggled to the correct English or French? She's
yeah,
because it sounds the same volume.
Look at the bottom of your screen, Ms. Potter, and you'll see interpretation there.
Yes.
If you're speaking in French, click it on French, and it'll probably come through better.
Okay.
Do you find it?
Is this better?
Yep, that's great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Awesome. Great. I'll just continue from there. Prior to COVID-19, tourism was one of the fastest growing industries in the world. We are here today, over a year into the pandemic, and the visitor economy is still in crisis. The tourism economy has lost over 500,000 jobs. Unemployment in the sector has surpassed the national unemployment rate, and the impact on tourism is greater than that experienced after 9/11, SARS, and the 2008 economic crisis combined. Canada's tourism sector was the first hit, the hardest hit, and will be the last to recover. Before COVID-19, the tourism sector in Canada was our 5th largest, responsible for 10% of Canadian jobs, $105 billion in revenues, and 2.3% of GDP. Since the onset of the pandemic, TIAC has been advocating for targeted support for the sector, and many of our recommendations require Bill C-14. We applaud the government for the implementation of the HASCAP program. We continue to work closely with government to facilitate open dialogue on feedback from the industry, and we also thank the government for the recent extension and revenue comparison changes for the CEWS program. However, we are still waiting for a sector-specific support package. A large portion of our recovery plan is based on business solvency. Over the past year, tourism businesses have lost revenue and cash flow, but regardless, fixed expenses like rent, mortgages, and taxes have continued. Without liquidity to stay on top of these costs, these businesses will not be able to survive and reopen. We have a number of recommendations with respect to improving current support programs, which we have provided to you in writing through our recovery plan, and we will continue to work with the government, providing industry feedback on these programs. We have seen the commitment from the government in the speech from the throne, the fall economic statement, and revised mandate letters on supporting the hardest hit businesses. But now is the time for us to see action and investment in measures to support the rebuilding of our sector. We are calling on the government for immediate action in this budget and are specifically asking for a tax incentive to Canadians for the 2021-2022 tax years to travel locally or within Canada. The development of a business events and urban recovery funding program. Top-up funding to Destination Canada to keep Canadian destinations top of mind, to support destination marketing organizations, and to entice the return of high-value travelers. Reinstatement of the Visitor GST rebate program for international visitors. Reintroduction of the federally funded Marquee Tourism Events Program, and support to save our airline sector, the backbone of tourism and the economy. One of our key recommendations is a tax incentive to help Canadians explore Canada, to stimulate the visitor economy, and to support small businesses. This is an opportunity to encourage domestic travel and unlock the spending power of Canadians. If we can shift just 2/3 of planned spend on international leisure travel towards domestic travel, it will make up for the forecasted $19 billion shortfall currently facing our visitor economy in 2021. Recovery of international travel will also depend on border reopening. We need to use current science-based data and effective testing and contact tracing, including committing to adopt a proof of vaccine as an addition to travel documents going forward. We need federal guidance on a policy roadmap so that tourism businesses can understand what conditions are required before border restrictions are relaxed. We need the government to set out the criteria for reopening. Je vous remercie, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Potter, and also thank you for sending us the information from time to time. Thank you all then for your presentations, and as I indicated earlier, we'll go to a 6-minute round first with Mr. Kelly, followed by Ms. Kotrakis. Pat?
Thank you, Chair, and I'll start with the last point that that Ms. Potter made about the necessity of criteria around reopening so that businesses can actually plan to recover. Is there anything in C14 that contains, does C14 contain such a roadmap or set of criteria under which the economy can reopen?
Not that we've seen. We know that ongoing work around the rollout of the vaccine program, as well as the monitoring and tracking the variants, is something that the government is working on. But to our knowledge at this time, there is no reopening plan in place.
Right. So again, this is for your members to be able to plan to recover and to move beyond absolutely critical survival or bare survival emergency measures, which are mostly based on debt, which actually eventually becomes a problem and a barrier to recovery. There's really no substitute for having your customers back.
No, and we're going to need time for businesses to be able to restock, prepare, communicate with their customers, and rehire.
Right. So you talked about sector-specific funding or programs that target that are targeted towards severely affected industries. Do either the regional recovery, regional relief and recovery fund and the highly affected sectors capital availability program, do they do that? Do they really target, say, your industry, for example, specifically?
Well, certainly the RRF fund has had sectors. A sector focus on it, and certainly tourism businesses have been encouraged to apply for that funding, but we know that only about 17% of all tourism businesses that have applied for that funding have at this point been successful in receiving it. And the HAZCAP program, we're still in early days, and so we are certainly sharing feedback that we're receiving from the industry with the folks in government to ensure that that program is as successful as possible.
So the other 83% of your members that have applied for the RRF and not been approved, have most of them been declined, or are they awaiting, or are they still waiting for answers?
It's a combination of both.
Do you know the split?
I don't at this time.
Okay. So again, getting back to allowing your industry to recover, and you're going to need to know under what circumstances, and you actually mentioned some of the tools that exist: vaccines, rapid results testing, therapeutics, things that are being deployed in other parts of the world, allowing their economies to reopen. So is the plan to get us there to a reopened economy? Is that what your industry, I guess, needs the most? Is that the biggest priority?
Absolutely. Travelers are global in nature, and we want to make sure that Canada's reopening plans align with what other jurisdictions around the world are also doing. We want to make sure that we're part of that seamless traveler experience, and that travel is open to everyone again. So for those that are vaccinated, proof of vaccination would be ideal. For those that are not vaccinated, testing and contact tracing would be ideal. And we know that the rapid testing that's available and that's ever evolving is proving to be more and more successful. And that will help us to get to the point where we can eliminate quarantines.
Okay, thank you. Maybe perhaps I'll just allow Monsieur Roy to also respond, because his industry or your industry is quite similar. You've got similar, or you're sort of a part of the same issue. Summer festivals. I said it before. I'm a member from Calgary. We have the Calgary Stampede, just an incredible part of our community facing the possibility of a second loss. Care to comment on the importance of a roadmap that will allow your members to be able to plan for recovery?
Mr. Waugh? There you go, Mark.
Je suis pas certain d'avoir compris.
I'm not 100% sure that I've understood the question, but yes, a roadmap is essential. What I said to some of you when we met individually is that above and beyond a vaccine calendar for the rollout, there needs to be an extra step. You have to see to what extent the fact that you may have 20, 40, or 60% of the population vaccinated, what that actually means, and especially in the area of tourism and culture. As of the point where we almost have herd immunity, then we could have an audience that would be as large as what we used to have. And that's what we're supposing we're taking as an assumption at this point. Now, François Legault has said that all those that will have wanted to have a first dose as of June 24th will have been vaccinated. Does that actually tangibly, what does that mean? Will we have festivals in July and August? I know. So that in Alberta, the government has provided some predictability. It published a 4-part calendar for reopening and ending this lockdown. And the 4th phase of that reopening, festival and events will be able to resume. In other words, when there will be fewer than 150 hospitalizations in the province, and the figure will be decreasing. However, in Ontario and other provinces, Quebec and other provinces throughout the country, that predictability doesn't exist.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. We'll move on to Ms. Koutrakis for 6 minutes, followed by Mr. St. Marie. Annie?
Merci, Monsieur le Président, and merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for to all participants for taking part today. Thank you for your testimony. I will be asking my first question of Mr. Milliard or Mr. Lavigne. The FCCQ has said it supported an investment of $500 million in airport infrastructure, and that was provided in the fall economic update. In what way should this funding be used to maximize the return on investment, and what is the importance of these types of programs to improve public transit infrastructure, and while also creating jobs that are good for the economy? And so thank you, Madam. That's an excellent question. We are in favor of this because our airport infrastructure exists throughout Canada, and in Quebec also. They are in dire need of some renovations and updating. So to me, that is an economic driver. But again, it's important to have airports, but it's even better to have planes that land in these airports. And we have a major problem in the regional air transport sector, given Air Canada is pulling out of some air some of those lines. So it's the case in the Atlantic region of Canada. So I would say that we are looking to see what the transport minister will have to say. There's some areas such as Val d'Or and other areas where we just really need service. So we do need to attract international investors in the region, but we also need this transportation issue. As to the project you refer to, the REM, is one of the major programs in the province of Quebec, and we need as much of the support of the federal government as possible, specifically with the Trudeau Airport connection. From what I gather, that agreement came to be over the last few weeks, but it's something that really has to be addressed over the next few weeks. For a city like Montreal to be in the situation it's in, it's a problem. Yes, and Laval as well. Yes, absolutely, Laval as well. Laval and Montreal, yeah, as you say, it's the greater region of Montreal. Also, Mr. Millard, you expressed your support for the United Fund to support small business, and specifically the support for chambers of commerce in the provinces, which will help improve the capacity for consumers to buy in these regions. Can you tell us how you intend to use these funds, and in what way would this be positive for Main Street businesses that are trying to recover from this pandemic? Answer. Thank you for your question. It gives me an opportunity to answer that the Chambers of Commerce network in Quebec and throughout the country, actually everywhere from Ontario to everywhere, that entrepreneurial fiber throughout the country is very important. It's important to have a private network of business people that speak to the government. So this network of chambers of commerce is the only private network in the entire ocean, if you will, of these types of programs. It's important for it to survive the crisis. A number of chambers of commerce really focus on events. So they organize galas and other events. It's important that the chambers of commerce focus more on their relationship with the governments. And as to buy local campaign in Quebec, we're seeing that there's been a lot of work that's been done, especially in this downtown core of Montreal. Really, we want people to value buying local, but what is buying local? It's also buying something that's produced locally, but also community purchasing, walking to the place that you're going to buy certain goods. So with the investments from the federal government, we'll be able to do a positive campaign throughout Quebec and throughout Canada.
For one more question. Merci,
Yeah,
Mr.
you get
Millard.
time. You get a minute and a quarter.
Okay, so my next question could be to anyone that would like to answer. I'm curious to know and have your thoughts on the HASCAP as proposed in the fall economic statement. And would you suggest any changes to the program to maximize uptake and support? How can we make it better?
Okay, who wants to start? Just yell. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Potter.
Thank you very much. That's a great question. There are a couple of points that I would like to make. One is that the work with the financial institutions to make sure that they really understand the program. There's a line in the program that says that businesses must be deemed viable by their financial institution in order to be able to receive the HASCAP loan. And we just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page as to when the viability is being measured. For businesses that haven't been open since 2019 or since February of 2020, they can't be looking at their 2020 financial records. And so there is that concern there. And then the other piece is, we do have businesses that have owners that have multiple properties and multiple businesses, and we want to make sure that the program is available on a per property basis and not by ownership. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Potter. We'll go to Mr. Waugh for a quick answer. Mr. Waugh?
Oui, simplement pour dire.
Yes. Just, I would add this. There's a distinction there in Quebec. The program is not that popular, actually, because there have been other loan programs in this cultural sector that were provided by the SODEC and other organizations. So in Quebec, it's a bit less useful, if you will. There's been less demand. What I'm hearing is from other parts of Canada for nonprofit organizations, it's a problem to be increasing one's debt level further and further, especially when there's no capitalization, in order to support this type of situation. The situation that festival and events find themselves in is quite delicate. It was already serious before the pandemic, but it's a real burden. We want to be as solid as possible after the pandemic.
Okay, thank you all. Just you can think about it during somebody else's round of questions, but I've had a few complaints related to Miss Potter. You indicated that for ASCAP you must be deemed viable by the lending institutions. I've been getting a considerable number of complaints from small businesses that the banks are not pulling their fair share. So if anybody's got anything to add on that later on, throw it in. We'll go to Mr. St. Marie and then Mr. Julian. Gabriel?
Oui, merci, Wayne.
Yes, thank you, Wayne. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses. Thank you for your presentations. It's been very enlightening. My first question is for Mr. Milliard. You were referring to the rent subsidy and the importance of having it be retroactive for those months when it wasn't something people subscribed to. When we discussed this issue with the minister, she says she prefers to look forward, look towards the future. What argument would you use to say to her that making this subsidy retroactive is not actually looking back at the past? Actually, I'll ask my colleague Mathieu Lavigne to say a couple of words about this. Mathieu. Yes, thank you. The argument that should be put forward, as Mr. Milliard said, is that we agree with the fact that generally we understand the reality of not really wanting retroactive programs. But there is this exceptional situation here, which is that the previous program, in the way in which it was designed, basically meant that it was impossible for small and medium enterprises to even apply. There was no calculation as to whether or not they were eligible. They couldn't even apply because the owner, the landlord had to actually make the request. And so it's unfair. So we're talking about a minority of companies, but it would be worthwhile to correct this this injustice in this particular case. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Milliard. This request for retroactivity is not ideological in nature. It's really operational, if you will. There was a glitch in the program, and that's why we're asking for it to be retroactive. It is not political. Okay, thank you. My next question, Mr. Roy. You referred to phase one, this sort of survival phase, the importance of having the wage subsidy extended for sectors that are hard hit while this crisis is ongoing. You referred to the first quarters of 2022. This subsidy, if it were to be extended or not, what would that mean for these events and festivals that you represent? Thank you. What I was saying a little earlier is that the wage subsidy is vital. Without that, teams would be completely decimated. And this expertise that is necessary to provide or produce these events would have just basically disappeared into the ether. So this wage subsidy is vital to us. It's it's absolutely needed in terms of a future recovery as well. When I refer to 2022, I'm saying this because we know that for events and festivals, despite what I said, there's this absolute total desire to be as active as possible, to deploy all of our capacity over the summer and to respect the public health requirements. We still know that we won't be having independent revenue to the extent that we used to, or what we're used to having. So we may see greater deficits, a real return to the way things were, which really involves major events. That business model will only really be able to come back to the fore next year when we can really sell tickets like the Summer Festival in Quebec, the Festival d'été du Québec, that will be able to sell those passes that they usually sell in February, March for the summer event. So that's really when it will be important to have to be more afloat, if you will, when those tickets come in. And it's the same thing for free festivals. Those festivals will also regain their sponsors. We have to go through this desert. It's not an absolute disaster in events and festivals, but it's half done. We don't think that we will be out of this phase until the beginning of next year. Thank you. Wayne, do I still have time for another question, or am I done?
Okay, merci.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'd like to get back to Mr. Milliard or Mr. Lavigne. In your presentation, you referred to the tourism sector, saying that given the fact that the sector is well represented on the panel, that you'd give others the opportunity to speak. But I'd like to hear from you. What are your specific demands for this sector, knowing that I'm concerned for those industries, the ecosystem, the hotels, etc. When you think of this greater area, this greater region of Montreal has really suffered in the context of the pandemic. Actually, the first demand would be for current measures to be extended for those sectors that still need this, essentially tourism and also this cultural sector. I found Ms. Bauman's testimony very touching in that regard. We have to make sure that these measures can be in place and remain. We have to stop thinking that because these are major hotel chains, that they're always foreign. Actually, that's very rarely the case. These are Canadian property owned. Canadian owned property, 30% overhead in some program is nothing when you consider the costs of these massive companies like Intercontinental, Marriott. They're looking at an occupancy rate of 15%. This is incredible. One would never have imagined in the worst possible imagine in our worst case scenario. So really, we need. It's about being more selective and keeping things open for those industries.
Thank you. Thank you all. We'll go to Mr. Julian, who will be followed in the next round by starting with Ms. Jansen. Peter?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks to all our witnesses for coming forward today on C14 and the fall economic statement. And we certainly appreciate your willingness to speak with us today at the Finance Committee. And we hope that you and your families continue to remain safe and healthy during this pandemic. I'm going to start my questions to Ms. Potter. Ms. Potter, this bill, C14, is based on the fall economic statement. And the controversial part of the fall economic statement, of course, has been the famous page summary statement of transactions, page 126, which talks about a cut starting April 1st through the course of the next fiscal year of nearly 50% in terms of program expenses, a substantial reduction in program expenses. Now, we know that COVID is continuing. Tragically, we're seeing a third wave come. And you've mentioned very important initiatives that the federal government can be making this year. You named about 5 in all. They could make a real difference in Canadian tourism and the tourism industry. So my first question is how important do you think it is for the federal government to realize that the pandemic it shouldn't be subject to an arbitrary cutback in program expenses, that the federal government should be looking to provide supports to industries that may not have necessarily received enough supports to date. And what would happen to the tourism industry if the programs that you've proposed and mentioned in your presentation weren't brought to bear? What would that mean in terms of the tourism industry by the end of the year?
Thank you for the question. What I can tell you is that we know, based on the work that we've done and the conversations we've had with the industry, is that we would have 60%, about 60% less tourism businesses still surviving today if it had it not been for the various funding support programs that the government had put in place. So when I say that we're grateful for those programs, it is in fact very genuine. The fact, though, is that the government mandated the tourism industry to shut down. And it's going to be some time yet for us to see the business come back. And so we need to see those programs extended. The other complication that we've got is that everybody has been, sitting home, mandated to being encouraged to stay home and in their houses, and there is a pent-up demand by Canadians who want to get out and travel again. What we would like to see is, as we are going to be competing with every other jurisdiction in the world, we would like to see Canadians exploring Canada themselves this year, and so we'd like to give them an incentive to do that. The Ontario provincial government has already committed to doing so. Other provinces, New Brunswick did one last year, and it was very successfully. And so we believe that this would be a fairly positive way to encourage Canadians to not only get out and discover their own country, but also to keep that discretionary spending here at home.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Et, ma prochaine question.
My next questions will go to Mr. Mia and Mr. Roy. When you look at Bill C-14, it is based on the fall economic statement from last fall that really provides for a decrease in spending year over year compared to this year. So in 2 weeks' time, we're already in the next fiscal year, and so decreasing expenditures, which is considerable. So even half of what happened in the first year of coronavirus. Given the pandemic that is ongoing, given employment, companies that still need support, is it an error to cut back on these programs? Would it not be good to extend, as you said, Mr. Mia, these programs so that jobs and companies can make it through the crisis? Mr. Roy, did you want to go ahead? Yes, I can start. I hope that this was based on some great optimism, that one thought that the second wave would not be as significant as it ended up being, and that we would gain our momentum in April, May, and June, and that these programs would no longer be useful. I hope the government at the federal level is aware of the fact that these programs remain necessary so long as the situation remains serious. It was the case with the second wave. We didn't perhaps see it arrive upon our shores, but programs are there, and the wage subsidy has been extended to June. I don't see why things would be different for a third wave, or who knows how many more waves we can expect or how long we can expect it will take until we can recover. It's important to be there. Mr. Trudeau has said it. It's important to be there. He is. He has to stay there and be there as long as necessary. I fully agree with what Mr. Roy said. We should not reduce the size of these programs, perhaps make them more restrictive for those who don't have the authorization to, have their businesses open. Those restaurants You know, hotels have an opportunity, but not really. Those companies need to be able to count on government support. You're right, Mr. Julian, to mention that the situation has evolved since November, but that things still remain problematic. You know, COVID is a problem in Canada, and we're not there yet.
Last question, Peter.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Millard, you referred to 15% occupancy rates in some hotels. I find that that's just, you know, when you look at this huge impact, it's really significant, not just on those jobs that are connected to those businesses, but also what it means for the entire community. It means far fewer expenditures for all those. It also has an effect on all the suppliers for those companies or businesses. Should the federal government be looking at the most hard-hit sectors in the context of this pandemic? Should it look to see if there are ways to create more programs to support those hard-hit sectors? Mathieu, go ahead. Yes, absolutely. You know, if you look at the occupancy rate of hotels, these are sectors that are directly affected, but like you say, there's a knock-on effect, and I think that's what you're referring to. In Montreal, hotels are full because of business conventions generally. So around all of that, you have restaurants, other businesses, that whole ecosystem. Even though theoretically they can resume operations, in actual fact, they won't, not fully. So long as that clientele is not there, the international clientele, specifically international business travel, then their activities will never be at the same level they were at before the pandemic. So these sectors will have to be targeted until the very end, until the sector fully recovers.
Thank you all. Going to a 5-minute round, starting with Ms. Jansen, followed by Mr. McLeod. Tamara?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to first direct my question to Ms. Potter. I've been really following closely along with the travel and tourism challenges, especially with independent travel agents. And so far, it really looks like the government has only offered nothing further than lockdowns for a plan, which has really harmed everybody. And then on top of it, now we have this HAS cap, which we thought was working. And now I hear from you, it's not really working at all. And even on top of that, HASCAP is charging 4% interest for a loan that you only need because the government has shut you down and given us no other options besides lockdown. Could you maybe talk to me about the fact that there's a 4% interest rate on a loan that many of these companies that probably couldn't even afford that kind of an interest rate?
Well, thank you for the question, Ms. Jansen. And I will say that in speaking with small businesses who have applied for the HASCAP program, they've been challenged by a number of things. One of them is, again, I go back to the viability rate. And certainly they are dismayed by the level of interest rate. But what they are buoyed by is the fact that the program was made available to them in the first place. So we just want to make sure that it's working properly for them, and that as many businesses as that want and need to access the program have the ability to do so. The other, if I could just also speak to the fact that this is a program that is again needed to be one that people can, if they've got, like I'll take a family business as an example. A family business may own a hotel, but they may have 3 properties, and they need to be able to access the money for each of the properties, because each of those properties have fixed expenses that they are trying to manage against. And I would just echo Mr. Millard's comments on occupancy rates. They've been so incredibly low, and they will not come back until such time as we return to travel in great numbers, and that we get the borders open and get those international and business travelers back. So the program is incredibly important. We just want to make sure that it is working properly.
Now, you mentioned that there are other regions, other countries that are using good data to show that there are other ways that, rather than just, what we're looking at right now in regards to lockdowns, in a way that we can open safely. I wonder if you could speak to that and show us kind of what you've seen in actual data that shows us there are other ways than just a lockdown.
So we've seen in other countries around the world and through our relationship with the World Travel and Tourism Council that other countries have been from the very beginning monitoring and putting in place other testing regimes and contact tracing options. In Iceland, as an example, very early in the pandemic, they when they wanted to see a return to travel, they put a testing regime in place, and they have been extremely successful. You know, visitors upon arrival would be tested. They would have to remain in quarantine until the test result came out. And as soon as the test result came out that was negative, they were able to travel freely throughout the country. So they've been able to keep their numbers of positive test results, you know, in days after arrival down to almost nothing.
So there is data to show that we could do this differently, and yet somehow we continue with the same regime, which is it's a real shame. It's costing businesses. They're having to take out loans that they probably can't afford at a 4% interest rate, which even the government knows is a crazy high interest rate at this point in time. But I'd like to actually, for a moment, mevrouw Bouwman, hartelijk bedankt. I heard you say some amazing things about the government and the programs that they've offered. And then I heard you talk about how your own business, your dance business, is decimated. And I have heard that from many dance programs here as well. And I wonder, again, because of the lag time in procuring vaccines and no other plan but lockdowns, how much more damage will you be facing because of the weight that you have to weigh in your industry?
Ms. Bowman, you're on mute. Ms. Bowman, Paya? There we go.
There I am. So yes, thank you for that question. Dank u wel. I'm by nature, I'm very much an optimist. By nature, I believe in the strength and the tenacity that art and dance have in our humanity. So I know it will be an incredibly hard journey. Mainly because I think that the dreams have been lost, the samples, the mentorship, the ability to have a great person to look up to, be it a dancer, be it a musician, be it an actor. They're not there. So to me, it is the question of how to rekindle the passion for art in young people. So that is going to be an interesting road. It will take time. I am so inspired by all the artists who have been able to make a 180-degree turn in their career and turned to Zoom communication, Zoom creation, online efforts. For our young people, those kind of efforts are much harder to do. Young people do need the education. We can't just say, well, hey, create a piece of art and do it and have it there. We all need to learn to read. We need to learn to read music. We need to learn to play. We need to do the ABC, or the 1 + 1 is 2. And once we have that, we can actually blossom this into the art of the future, the art of tomorrow, the art that comes out of COVID-19 experiences. So it's not going to be easy. I am burdened, as I said earlier, I'm burdened by the fact that we are faced with a debt of $50,000 to the government, even as thankful as I am, because it helped us through this period. Yeah, does that answer that a little bit? Yeah.
We have to thank you very much. Thank you all. Turning to Mr. McLeod, 5 minutes, followed by Mr. St. Marie. Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is to the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. I represent the Northwest Territories, and up until the pandemic hit, tourism was the sector that was growing leaps and bounds. We had aurora viewing tourism, people coming from all over the world, and our hotels were full. You couldn't get a room sometimes in any of the hotels. New hotels were being built. The airlines were full, totally booked. Restaurants were full, and then the pandemic hit, and it really took its toll. And what in our discussions with the tourism sector, what we talked about was that the vaccine being the key to unlocking the travel and getting the tourism back coming into the Northwest Territories and the North for that matter. Now, in this part of the country, we're going to have in the Northwest Territories and Yukon and Nunavut, we're going to have everybody that wants to be vaccinated done by the end of April. However, now we're realizing that it's really not going to make much of a difference on the tourism industry because our borders are still going to stay locked and restrictions will still be in place for travel because of what's going on in the South. So would you agree that, the recovery of the tourism industry is going to be largely based on the rollout of the vaccine, getting everybody vaccinated in the country, in Canada, for us, especially up in the Western provinces? And, it's really going to be a challenge to get tourism going until the last province gets everybody vaccinated.
So thank you very much for your question, and I would agree that vaccines are the way forward for us to get the tourism industry back up and running again. The other, while we're waiting, while we're working towards herd immunity here as a country, to be able to encourage Canadians to get out and travel across the country would be really important. And so it would be great if the federal government could take a leadership role in, one travel policy instead of, 13 travel policies. The other the other thing is that we know, based on research provided by our friends at Destination Canada, that if the borders remain closed until October, it will take until 2026 for the tourism industry, including the aviation sector and all the businesses that support the airlines, that it will take until 2026 for us to get back to 2019 numbers. So it is a long road to recovery that we're looking at. And so we need to, we can't let our eye off the ball. We need to make sure that those vaccines happen. We need to make sure that we've got the right policies in place, that we're lining up with what our colleagues are doing in other jurisdictions so that we are, again, and as I said earlier, part of that seamless traveler experience around the globe. Thank you for your question.
I think you touched on what was going to be my next question, because our tourism industry, especially in the aurora viewing, was largely Asian market. We had a lot of people coming from Japan, China, and Korea. And even if we had herd immunity in Canada, I don't know how many people are going to be traveling, very, very soon. I don't know how many people we'll be seeing from other countries coming or traveling anywhere for that matter. So I think that's going to be a challenge. I didn't hear you talk about Indigenous tourism. I'm curious if you had any information on what the impact has been for Indigenous tourism. I know in my riding, I've talked to a lot of operators that are living in small, remote communities that are just closing their doors because it's a mom and pop operation or one person operator, and it's just easier for them just to do nothing and not try to chase programs and dollars. So I think we may be seeing a greater impact on Indigenous tourism than the other markets in the tourism sector.
Ms. Potter?
So we've certainly seen an impact on Indigenous tourism businesses right across the country. Living here in Ontario, I'm very familiar with the organization Indigenous Tourism Ontario and the work that they've been doing to try to support businesses through this pandemic, not only with making sure that staff have been able to be retained and that they're redeveloping their skills, but also in those business supports, additional training and but access to financial support has been something that has been a priority for us in all of our conversations throughout this pandemic, and we've been pleased to see some funding flow through the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada to support those operators, especially those that are in more remote and rural communities.
Okay, thank you all. In order to try and give more people a chance, I'm going to go to one question each from Mr. St. Marie, Mr. Julian, Mr. Falk, and Ms. Zerowitz. But before I do, the hospitality and tourism is big in my home province. One of the issues I'm getting on the wage subsidy is they have to do their planning now. The wage subsidy to June is not enough. They believe it has to be longer. What's your view on that? And should it be a specific program in terms of the wage subsidy just for those industries that are hard hit in hospitality and tourism? Ms. Potter.
Well, thank you, Mr. Easter, for that question. And absolutely, we are looking right now, and our suggestion is at least to the end of the summer of 2021, but ideally to the end of the year. Although I was talking to my colleagues at Restaurants Canada yesterday, and they were suggesting through till April 1st of 2022. There are so many businesses that are still at this point trying to keep their staff on team, so that when they are able to open, that they've got the people with the right skills in place, and so that wage subsidy is just an incredibly important tool for them.
Okay, if we could go, Mr. Waugh, you wanted to add something quick?
Oui, on en a discuté, nous aussi, et puis...
Yes, we also discussed this, and to us there are two solutions. Either under the current program, you would change the criteria as of the month of June, and meaning that the eligibility would mean that de facto you'd only have the most hard-hit companies targeted, because it would be a very high threshold, so it would be culture and tourism. Or you create a new program and it is really focused on those companies that are hardest hit, that are basically in tourism and culture.
Okay, thank you. Then one question each, Mr. St. Marie, followed by Mr. Julian.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you. My question is for Mr. Roy. Once vaccines have been distributed, once we see that we are getting out or pulling out of the pandemic and into recovery, in what way would starting up these festival events actually be a good way to recover? Answer: we've seen it over the last year. The absence of events and festivals throughout the country has really affected all communities. If you look at Quebec City, on the Grande Allée, all those restaurant owners say that it's been really terrible. I've seen what's happened in Calgary, and the fact that the Stampede didn't happen was a huge shortfall. It's the same thing everywhere. Toronto, everywhere. In the Maritimes, everywhere. So what festival events do traditionally is that they essentially set people a vague intention to do something at some point, and then people put things into their calendar, and then people spend on the festival and event, but of course on all the other activities around the event. When we had had a study done with KPMG, we saw that a third of the expenses really are in restaurants, and then a quarter of those festival goers spend money on hotel expenses, whether it's hotels or Airbnbs. Essentially, that's a quarter. So there is this knock-on effect for all these other companies and enterprises around the festival and event.
Thank you, Mr. Julian, followed by Mr. Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. Your testimony has all been very interesting. I'd like to direct my comments and
sorry, Mr. Fox, Mr. Julian, and then you.
Sorry.
I know you're just like a horse out of the starting gate there.
I just got so excited when I heard my name. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Peter.
ma question,
My question is for Mr. Roy. Major events really play an important role throughout the country. You are fearing that you may lose how many of these major events if the required help is not delivered over the coming year? How many of these major events do you think risk disappearing if we don't really ensure that we have the proper supports in place? I should say that FAME represents events of all sizes throughout the country, large and small. As to the disappearance of some events and festivals, I think it will happen because it's really, we're only halfway through and we're in a marathon here, and we know that we haven't really felt all of the effects yet on the festival and event sector. I've spoken to some of our members. There's a major disparity in the impacts. Some have had major operating deficits, and some managed to be in the black, but just barely. It's a bit of a confusing situation because we don't know where we're at. Parliament makes decisions from 60 to 75 for the wage subsidy, for instance. That has an effect on our finances. And also, not knowing whether the wage subsidy will exist past June, that has an effect. So in other words, it's this predictability aspect. We need predictability, not only on the public health side, but on this side as well.
Thank you. Thank you both. Now turning to Mr. Falk and Ms. Zerowitz will close it off. Go ahead, Ted.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to our witnesses. Appreciated hearing all of your testimony. I'd like to direct my comments and question to Ms. Potter. In the tourism industry, I've got many tourism operators in my constituency. I want to key in on two of them in particular that provide tourism to Canada's north. One of them is Wings over Kississing. They offer northern fishing, hunting, and sightseeing expeditions to Manitoba's north. They're based here in my riding in southern Manitoba. They also operate a charter air service to First Nations and Indigenous communities throughout the north as well. Recently, the Liberals sent out a subsidy program to airlines that provide services to northern communities. But the program was flawed in that it was specific to scheduled airline services and not charter airline services that actually service sometimes the same communities and compete for the same business. The other operator I want to point out is an organization called Churchill Wild, who've got international acclamations for their polar bear experiences, their whale watching, and their fishing expeditions as well. Both first-class operators, both require international tourism to sustain their businesses. Can you talk a little bit more about how important it is to open up our international border and how we have to somehow figure out how not to use these quarantine hotels?
Well, thank you, Mr. Falk, for your question. And I'll just go back to saying that opening the borders and giving some lead time into when we can expect to open the borders was incredibly important for these operators. You know, you've mentioned a couple of operators in Manitoba. I was talking earlier today with a group of operators from Northern Ontario, same kind of idea, fly-in fishing camps, resource-based tourism, and they rely 95 to 100% on the US visitor. And they have rebooked everyone from 2020 into 2021. And at this point, they don't know whether or not they should be rebooking them to 2022 and making themselves available to domestic tourism this year, or if there's a chance that those US visitors will be able to come. And you know, the importance of the US visitor as well as other international travelers is that they're the economic stimulators. I mean, they stay longer than domestic travelers do. They spend more money. And that's an incredibly important delineation point to be making. So yes, we need to get the borders open, and we need to be putting in place proof of vaccination and testing and contact tracing so that we can eliminate the need for quarantines on arrival.
Thank you, Ms. Potter, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you both, Ms. Zerwitz. Single question, and then we'll close. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank everyone for their excellent presentations and the discussion today. My question is directed to Pia Baumann. Pia, thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing the story of the Pia Baumann School for Ballet and Creative Movement. I think very much your story and the experience you've had over the last year has been very much reflective of many similar types of amazing artistic and creative organizations across the country. I just C14, if it's passed, will actually allow organizations such as the Pia Baumann School of Dance to be able to apply for the rent subsidy before you actually incur the cost. So I want to know whether or not you thought that would be helpful to you. That's one. And the second part of that is, what more do you think our government can do to be helpful? You had mentioned that you'd have to pay back 50,000 of the CEBA. I just want to point out that you actually would only have to pay 40,000 out of the 60,000. It's 20,000 actually would be forgiven. So we just gave you back 10,000. But what more do you think our federal government can do to support organizations such as your school?
Okay, let's first go to yes, the am I on there? Yeah.
Yes.
To the change in approach as to when the CEBA support comes in, it makes a tremendous difference.
Mm-hmm.
For me, for the school, for our treasurer, it's all about cash flow. Mm-hmm. And receiving the rent support before the rent is due makes an unbelievable difference. So that's very, very important. Then could you just go back, please, Madame Zerowitz?
Oh, that's okay.
To the second question.
My second question was, what more can our government do, the federal government do, to support organizations such as yours moving forward? I know you had mentioned that you have to pay back 50,000 of the small business loans, but it's actually 40,000 out of 60. But what more outside of that would you advocate that we do to support?
And we'll have to be fairly tight, Pia. We're into the next panels round.
I will. I hope that, or what would be helpful, if the deadline for repaying that loan could be extended by, I think, 2 years. So I'm looking at 2024.
Okay. With that, we are slightly over our time for this panel, but thank you very much to everyone. A lot of good information here, some good new ideas coming out, and things that we can certainly work with. So thank you one and all for taking the time appearing before the committee today. And with that, we will suspend for about 3 minutes while they bring in the next panel. Meeting suspended. Thank you all. looking at C14 at this particular hearing. We look forward to the discussions today, and I would start with the maple sugar industry and receptions from the province of Quebec. If you could hold your presentation to about 5 minutes, it'd be helpful. Ms. Lorraine, go ahead. Welcome.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci Monsieur Easter. Donc, mon nom est Stéphanie Lorrain, présidente de l'Association des salles de réception et cabanes à sucre du Québec. Je suis propriétaire d'une cabane à sucre qui reçoit environ 80 000 personnes durant la saison du printemps pour une période d'environ 8 semaines et nous accueillons près de 200 à 300 événements.
Lorraine, we're not getting the English translation coming through, Mr. Clerk.
Okay, sorry. Yes,
no, that's not your fault. It's just check on your screen, Miss Lorraine. If you have at the bottom of the screen, you'll see there it says translation or interpretation. Make sure it's on French when you're speaking French. It'll come through clearer to us.
Ah oui, parfait. Je crois.
Very well. I think I've just dealt with that. Is that good? Okay. Okay, I'll start again. So my name is Stéphanie Laurent. I am the president of the Association des salles de réception érablière commerciale du Québec, or reception halls and commercial sugar bushes. I own a sugar bush that welcomes over 80,000 people over the spring period. And in our facility, we have 300 to 400 weddings a year. So last spring, when COVID hit, our establishment had invested practically $300,000 to start the sugar season, maple sugar season, and we had to close down operations from one day to the next. So to contribute to the fight against COVID, we created masks. We produced masks. We distribute hundreds of types of equipment. We transformed our maple sugar bush into a mask production company, essentially. All that was insufficient last July. We had no more revenue. All the banquets had been delayed. We're looking at a loss of 80% of business. So I decided to contact my competitors, other sugar bushes in Quebec, and I realized the situation was catastrophic for our industry. We are halls that welcome large numbers of people at once. So I created this association, and as a registered organization representing our industry with various government representatives. So we have worked from the start tirelessly in order to try to save the sugar bushes in Quebec. There are very few of us in Quebec. Before COVID, there were about 240 sugar bushes, and today we've already lost about 100. So there are fewer than 140 maple sugar bushes representing this industry internationally. Given this problem, knowing that the 2021 season may also be imperiled, we decided to create a project called Ma Cabane à la Maison. Home Sweet Home is what it's called in English. It is essentially a box, meals in boxes kind of system that Quebecers can order online so that they can have that sugar bush experience at home. We did absolutely everything in our power to launch that project. With no liquidity, with actually no means, we created a platform that brings together 75 maple sugar facilities on the same transactional site. We launched it officially last February, and to date, 1.5 million visitors have come to our site, and $7 million of revenue has come in for participating businesses over this period of 2 weeks. So this really has been an inordinate success that we've experienced. We've been resilient. We have really pulled up our sleeves, rolled up our sleeves, and I can tell you, unfortunately, today, I'm not sure that will be enough, sadly, because our calendar for the next few months remains empty. All weddings and other banquets have been postponed to 2022. We have managed to live without any income for the last 12 months, but this may be harder over the next 12 months. That is my testimony for you today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Loren, and I would highly recommend that Sugar Bush experience with the sugar, with the syrup on the snow. Mr. Cochrane with the Canadians for Tax Fairness. The floor is yours. Thank you. You're muted. There you go.
Unmuted. Okay. Thank you kindly for having Canadians for Tax Fairness comment on this bill. If I'm not mistaken, members of every party in the course of speaking to Bill C-14 expressed support for tax fairness. That's music to the ears of our organization. Now we just need to see some real action. Before I discuss taxes, let me touch on the other side of the ledger, spending. This bill will provide needed funds for some important measures. Unfortunately, it does not go far enough. Parents need more support, students need more support, people with disabilities, our elders, workers, local businesses, and the poor need more support. It was true before the pandemic. The crisis just made it starker. Predictably, even insufficient support has led to fear-mongering about the debt. Most of the concerns are misguided and misleading. The federal government's debt is not like the debt of households or businesses or other levels of government. The federal government literally spends money into existence. There is no limit to its financial resources. That does not mean there is no limit to the government's spending. The limits are imposed by the real resources that money can command. Eventually, if increases in money circulating in the economy do not increase the products, services, and assets that we want to buy, we will get inflation. At the moment, this is a remote concern. Despite worries at the beginning of the pandemic and misinformed fears recently, inflation remains well below the Bank of Canada's long-standing target of 2%. Taxes are an important tool for controlling inflation as they draw money out of the economy. However, just as importantly, they are a tool for controlling inequality. We have a trickle-up economy. Consider money given directly to people at the bottom of our economic hierarchy. Some of that money gets spent on rent, which goes to a landlord. The landlord uses it to cover the mortgage, which goes to a lender. The lending company uses some of that money to pay its workers, while some will be used to pay its own creditors, and some may go to dividends. Those workers will buy food at a grocery chain, which again will pay workers as well as creditors and equity owners. As the money spent into the economy circulates, portions of it are continually siphoned off to asset owners. The work of Thomas Piketty and his collaborators shows that the wealthy get wealthier simply by virtue of the highly unequal distribution of asset ownership. Their income from owning assets is not a reward for entrepreneurial risk or innovation. It is not a reward for hard work. They accumulate wealth simply by already being wealthy. The wealthy are able to use their money to shape our society in detrimental ways. They fund think tanks that defend their interests while presenting as neutral commentators. They hire lobbyists to influence lawmakers on policies that benefit them. They employ an untold number of people to bend tax laws and exploit offshore tax havens. This applies to both wealthy families and powerful corporations. Wealth taxes and excess profit taxes, alongside more progressive income taxes, are powerful tools to address inequality and its myriad harms. as well as being sources of government revenue. Additionally, government should act promptly to close tax loopholes and end the use of tax havens. These measures would create fiscal space for the kind of bold government initiatives that we need to support people and resurrect our economy coming out of the pandemic. The pandemic teaches us that we are all in this together. The myth that the market justly rewards what is socially valuable must be abandoned. When the pandemic struck and we needed decisive action to keep the essential parts of our economy functioning, it was not wealthy people via the market who made that happen. It was government. And the same is even more true of the climate crisis. The government needs to spend large amounts of money to transition our economy to carbon neutrality. That money will inevitably trickle up where it will unjustly empower the wealthy. Measures like wealth taxes, excess profit taxes, and closing tax loopholes will keep that money moving so it can serve our shared interests. These must be key components of the fiscal toolkit as we deal with the aftermath of the pandemic and the ongoing climate crisis. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Mr. Cochrane. Turning then to Mr. Woodick with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Welcome, Aaron. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, of course, to the committee for having me appear again today. For those who are unfamiliar with the Taxpayers Federation, we're a national nonprofit, nonpartisan group. We have 235,000 supporters across the country, and our advocacy is really focused on three general areas: lower taxes, less government waste, and accountable and transparent government. I don't want to shock anyone on the committee, but the CTF has something of a reputation as being the biggest skinflints around town. And that's a tag that we're not at all ashamed of having in a town where there's really no shortage of people asking for more spending and very few asking for less. So we think it's important as part of that debate that there be a counterweight to what effectively are endless pleas for more everything, and we're very proud to play that role. Insofar as we apply that lens to, if I can call it a tidal wave of spending that's washed over the country during the course of this pandemic, I don't think the concern is demanding perfection from government, but just asking for a little bit of humility. These temporary emergency programs are very expensive programs. They're very blunt instruments, which is understandable given that they had to be conceived, designed, and implemented in a matter of days or weeks as opposed to the usual months or years. And given the circumstances, I think that most fair-minded people will agree that a little slack deserves to be cut in terms of their implementation. But it's also fair to ask that governments take steps to improve and recalibrate these programs as they go along in order to ensure that what is being spent is actually being spent well. And a couple of examples can illustrate the ways in which the government arguably has overshot the mark thus far. If you look at StatsCan's data that shows that between the first and third quarters of last year, aggregate private sector earnings dropped by about $15 billion, so a significant sum in terms of lost income. But during the same period, government sent out $103 billion in transfers, primarily from employment insurance and the emergency response benefit. So what that means is for every $1 Canadians lost in income, the government sent $7 out the door. And so if the goal of these policies was income replacement, it's an enormously expensive overshoot. And also looking at the business side, if you look at the emergency wage subsidy, which was designed to save private sector jobs, an appropriate objective, it has also been incredibly expensive, with each saved job coming at a cost of $188,000 in government spending. And this is happening at a time while we're hearing stories in the media of large corporations banking record profits. They're boosting executive pay. They're issuing special dividends to shareholders. I don't think that's what most people envisioned that the wage subsidy was supposed to be used for. So these examples are just two that suggest there's room for improvement in terms of targeting pandemic support to achieve the results that we're looking for, but at a lower cost. With respect to C14 specifically, the main concern we have about this bill is the requested increase in the debt borrowing limit. I know that the minister and Mr. Fast had an exchange on this issue at a previous meeting. But with respect, the minister's insistence that there's a chart on page 141 of the fall economic statement that explains everything was not very persuasive. first of all, that chart that she cites includes spending projections out to 2024. So that does not explain why the minister requires such a huge increase in the debt ceiling today in 2021. It also bakes in the projection, $100 billion in stimulus, which the minister has committed to spend without deciding what she wants to spend it on. And in our view, that has it backwards, putting the cart before the horse. So with all due respect, rather than demanding that the opposition push through the bill and get more borrowing room, we think that the minister's time would be better spent presenting a federal budget, which we haven't had in 2 years. I understand the government insists that things are in flux, and so presenting one is difficult. I think that was a reasonable argument a year ago. I think it's a lot more difficult to make that argument today, especially when you consider all our peer countries and every province in Canada except Nova Scotia has managed to present one. And I'm certain that this government does not want to leave the impression that it is somehow uniquely incapable of presenting a budget at this time. So in closing, we just urge them to get on with that and produce a federal budget at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Woodrick. Turning then to Moody's Tax Law LLP, Kim Moody, Chief Executive Officer. Welcome back, Mr. Moody. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee members, and happy St. Patrick's Day. I see some of you are wearing green, so hope it's a great day. Thank you for the opportunity to appear to discuss Bill C-14. My name is Kim Moody. I'm a chartered professional accountant and the CEO and director of Moody's Tax Law, Moody's Private Client in Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto. I have a long history of serving the Canadian tax profession with a variety of leadership positions, including chair of the Canadian Tax Foundation, co-chair of the Joint Committee on Taxation of the Canadian Bar Association and CPA Canada, and chair of the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, to name a few. Given the limited time we have this afternoon, I'm going to keep my comments rather short and comment on only two matters: the proposed amendments to the debt ceiling in the Borrowing Authority Act contained in Bill C-14, and the fact that Canadians are now approaching the second anniversary in 2 days of the federal budget. So let's start with the proposed amendments to the BAA. And while I'm a tax specialist and certainly not a BAA expert, currently Section 4 of the BAA provides that the total amount of debt must not exceed $1.168 trillion at any given time. This limit is subject to certain exceptions and provided for in Section 4 and in conjunction with Section 6 of the BAA. And Bill C-14 proposes to amend both Sections 4 and 6 with a highlight amendment, as Mr. Woodrick said, to increase the upper current limit to $1.831 trillion. An increase of $663 billion, or 56.7% from its current ceiling. And that's a material increase by any measurable standard. With exceptions provided for by Section 6, I guess the question is, why the need today to increase the ceiling so substantially? Where's the plan? Is the government intending to utilize that increased borrowing capacity? If so, again, where's the plan? And shouldn't that be accompanied by a financial budget? More on that later. And what will such increased borrowing do to inflation and interest costs? Is that part of the plan too? And what about the plan to repay this debt? Does it include a reasonable repayment period that will not saddle our children's future with high borrowing costs that compromise essential government services? And how will this increased borrowing capacity affect our country's taxation policies? Will we see across the board tax increases? Or will the wealthy be asked to pay just a little bit more, thus causing even more capital flight to greener pastures? What's being asked to be passed in Bill C-14 can be depicted in an overly simplistic example where I disagree with the witness, Mr. Cochrane, where he says you can't compare government debt to household debt. Frankly, I think you can. And yes, there's differences, but debt is debt, and by any measurable standard. And so let's consider the case of Mr. Apple. He lost his job as a result of his employer being forced to shut down because of strict public health restrictions, and his savings are rather modest. He does not have the ability to pay his ongoing bills, so he applies for and receives various government support programs. However, the support he receives is not enough to maintain the lifestyle that he's accustomed to, and being the rational person that Mr. Apple is, he develops a plan, makes necessary adjustments to his lifestyle, cuts back on non-necessities, and ultimately tries hard to survive on the reduced income that he has. And eventually Mr. Apple is able to secure new employment and slowly get back to the lifestyle that he is accustomed to. Now let's consider the situation of Mr. Apple's friend, Mr. Orange. He's in the exact same situation as Mr. Apple. He lost his job, does not have enough savings to maintain his normal lifestyle. However, instead of cutting back on non-essential expenditures like Mr. Apple, he applies to get his credit card limit increased by 56.7%. And some crazy company, credit card company, decides to grant him that limit. And for so he now has the ability to borrow a lot more money. He does so that he can maintain his existing lifestyle. Mr. Orange has no plan to repay. He simply wants to maintain, and he eventually reaches the maximum of his limit and has a large debt to repay. The credit card company is charging interest, which is adding to the debt. Eventually, he returns to normal employment, but his earnings are not sufficient to materially reduce the debt. He's got a problem, and he falls behind on making his normal payments. The credit card company demands him to repay, but cannot. His options are limited, and ultimately all the options are ugly. In the above scenario, who's in a better spot? Well, obviously, Mr. Apple. And for Canada, who do we want to be comparable to? Obviously, Mr. Apple, with a plan and a path forward. Do we have a plan with respect to the increased ceiling amount under Section 4 of the BAA? If so, it's not obvious to me, and Canadians need that plan. And I say at this point, I'll share Mr. Woodrick's comments about the fall economic statement. The information in that was lacking in my view. So this leads me to my second and final comment. March 19th, 2019. Does that date mean anything to anyone? Well, it should. That was 730 days ago. That was the last time the federal government released a budget, and that's a record, and our government continues to use COVID as the excuse for not releasing a plan. But as former Parliamentary Budget Officer Kevin Page said in October 2020, budgets are fiscal plans, and to say that because there's too much uncertainty we're going to manage without a plan is kind of bizarre. He said, the reason we have plans is because there is uncertainty. And I absolutely agree. In this day and age of uncertainty, a fiscal budget and plan is needed. And the recent November 30th fall economic statement is not that plan. As esteemed economist Dr. Jack Mintz stated in the National Post on December 3rd, 2020, I was hoping our new Minister of Finance, once a fine journalist, might produce a fall fiscal statement written clearly and to the point. Instead, we are treated to 237 pages of repetitive backslapping and cliche-laden phrases that few will bother to read. I agree. As Kevin Page stated in a CBC News article on December 6, 2020, after the release of the fall economic statement, we don't really have a good view, almost no view of the government spending today. We have estimates of what the government thinks it will spend for 2020, 2021, said Page, but those are not the actual monies that are going out the door. Accordingly, it is critical for our country's fiscal future to develop a well-thought-out budget and to do it quickly. Transparency and accountability are not luxuries. They are requirements for Canadians. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moody. And before I turn to the last panelist, just the lineup for questions in the first round will be Mr. Fast, Mr. Fragiskatis, Mr. St. Marie, and Mr. Julian. So turning to the independent workers in Quebec, Ms. Caroline Bedard, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Bonjour à tous. Good day, everyone. I'd like to start by explaining the mission of Travailleurs Autonomes Québec, or Independent Workers Quebec. Our mission is to work for the recognition of the rights of self-employed workers, to support them and accompany them in the success of their small businesses. Another of our missions is to have the status of the self-employed legally recognized, since it is not yet legally defined, and because of the lack of a precise definition, it's detrimental to many of them in all facets of their daily lives. I just simply like to inform you that in Canada, there were nearly 3 million self-employed workers before the pandemic, and unfortunately, we are certain we will have fewer players after the pandemic. The pandemic that we are currently experiencing clearly demonstrates a problem here because no program is adapted to the reality of the self-employed. Let's start with the second version of the commercial rent subsidy. The form asks for the business number, which is in fact the GST number at the federal level. Did you know that in Quebec, more than 60% of self-employed workers earn less than $30,000 and are therefore not registered for the GST? If this is the case in Quebec, you can extrapolate to all the other provinces. If the government thought it was going to help self-employed workers pay their commercial rents. Well, it didn't work out because 6 out of 10 self-employed workers don't have a business number. Let's continue with the Canada Economic Recovery Benefit. Once again, the application forms are not well adapted to the reality of a self-employed worker. They ask if the individual is looking for a job. They ask if the individual has voluntarily left his job. They ask if the individual has refused a job, and so on. Did you know that a self-employed person is not looking for a job? They're looking for clients under contracts. When companies are closed by the government because of a lockdown, they're asked to look for a job anyway if they're not considered essential. So if they answer no to the job search, the application is automatically denied. By asking a self-employed person to look for a job, it is to disrespect him towards his or her small business and send the following message to people: be a wage earning employee and you're going to get help. And that's in fact what most CRA agents tell hundreds, if not thousands, of workers over the phone. To continue with the Canada Service Agency agents, well, it is, as you can well imagine, a bit of a nightmare and psychologically distressing for thousands of self-employed workers because there's no solution here. Since January 18th, CRA agents have been checking taxpayers who have received the Canada Emergency, have been checking in on them. They validate earned income of $5,000 or more before the first application. We're told that, in fact, it takes 2 to 4 weeks for the audits to be completed, and in reality, delays are 6 to 10 weeks and even more for some self-employed workers. Imagine the ordeal for some who have no other source of income during these delays. This is in addition to the fact that people are having to deal with disrespectful agents. I mean, we agree to verifications, but can we stop these checks at the $5,000 of earned income as mentioned in the messages? Why is it that a self-employed person who has declared more than $25,000 in earned income, who calls an agent to get information on his file, is suddenly told that the CRA will check a whole bunch of other aspects in the file? This only lengthens the delay. What do you expect? We are dependent on the CRA agents who pick up the phone. When the self-employed worker mentions that during the audit that he or she has no other source of income, these are the kinds of answers these people have been getting. There are food banks and welfare in your province. It's not my problem if you chose to be self-employed. Get a job and you won't have a problem. So ultimately, this issue of not being recognized is a problem. So we should ask ourselves this question collectively: how can we help the nearly 3 million self-employed people in Canada? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Medard. We will then turn to the round of questions, starting with Mr. I think we're going to cut back this round to 5 minutes so we can get a few more people in. So Mr. Fast, 5 minutes if we could.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And because my time is short, I'm going to cut to the chase here. I'm going to go directly to Messrs. Moody and Mr. Skinflint, as he called himself, Mr. Woodrick. As you have rightly noted, Bill C-14 dramatically increases our debt ceiling by $663 billion. That's historic, as you know. And that includes $100 billion worth of stimulus funding that is effectively unallocated. In other words, the minister has refused to tell us where that will be spent. There's another $223 billion worth of unallocated borrowing capacity that she says she really won't need, but we knew they blew past the last debt ceiling, and we fully expect that'll happen again. So to the two of you, Messrs. Moody and Woodrick, given the fact that this comes at a time when we haven't had a budget tabled for 2 years, would you comment on the merits of increasing the debt borrowing capacity of the government so dramatically at a time when we don't even have a budgetary framework in place to assess what this means for our country?
Who wants to start? Mr. Woodrick?
Sure.
Well, thank you for the question. Look, it's troubling to say the least. The fact that this would be troubling even if we did have a budget, we don't. The very fact that the minister has committed to spend money without knowing what to spend it on is I think, getting the entire budgetary process backwards. Normally in a policy debate or discussion, you figure out what you want to do, you figure out how much money you need for it, and then you make your case for it. That's not what she has done here. She has already committed to spend money, but she doesn't know what she wants to spend it on. That is a recipe for trouble. What's also curious is that, as I cited some of the statistics earlier about overspending, and again, I am not suggesting the government had to get it perfect. I understand they were in a hurry and that not everything was going to be perfect, but by their own admission, and I believe the term that she used was preloaded stimulus. She used the term preloaded because we have seen, even into the lower income deciles, that a lot of Canadians are banking a lot of this money. And so the minister has come out and said, well, we've preloaded this stimulus, so hopefully when things turn around, people will go out and spend. And yet she also wants to spend $100 billion in the name of stimulus. So I don't understand how it is if she's spent more than she planned to, but she says, don't worry, that will turn out to be stimulus. But she also says we still need to spend $100 billion. We just don't know on what. Look, if the minister has a plan, I think she's entitled to make the case for that. She should do it in a budget. She should not be asking for Parliament to increase the debt ceiling unless she can present a budget and explain what she wants to spend the money on.
Mr. Moody, if you want in, but be fairly quick so we can get in another question. You're on mute. You're on mute, Kim.
Sorry about that. The joys of Zoom. I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Woodrick, and I wholeheartedly dismiss, for a whole variety of good logic, the fact that trickle-up economics works and there's tax loopholes to close down, and we can just go offshore and grab all that money. I mean, that's nonsensical and just will not work in order to deal with this increased ceiling and I hope not increased spending. So that's probably all I have to say.
Ed, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. The government has also recently abandoned the idea of fiscal anchors, even though the finance minister's mandate letter actually references fiscal anchors. In fact, they've instead used fiscal guardrails, which relate to the stimulus spending. But I would ask you to comment on whether fiscal anchors are necessary, especially in a critical time like this when we've just come through the worst pandemic of our lifetime, the massive fiscal management challenge we're going to have. How important is it for this government to actually put in place fiscal anchors that will guide the government going forward when it comes to the management of our national finances? Mr. Woodrick.
Starting with Mr. Woodrick.
Yeah, thank you. Well, look, I would actually disagree that they recently abandoned them. They abandoned them very early when they came into office. They promised a balanced budget. They didn't deliver it. Then the debt to GDP ratio started to creep up. So it's not a new phenomenon. The minister's insistence on fiscal guardrails, she says that she's going to impose them, but she doesn't want to do it until later on. And it's a bit like saying, well, we don't want to put guardrails where the cliff is. We're going to wait till we get back down on level ground and then we'll put up some guardrails. So I think it's important to have something to measure your level of risk by, and not having any anchor at all. And I recognize that today a balanced budget is a pretty aggressive one, but you need to have something. That is another reason we need a budget. And so, I think the fact we don't have one is very worrisome.
Okay, Mr. Vragascatis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Before I turn to the witnesses, there was in the previous panel, if colleagues will recall, a point raised, I believe, by Mr. Kelly, could have been Ms. Jansen, I'm not sure, about rapid tests. I think it's an important question to raise, but I think the record should reflect the actual situation. And colleagues can find this online. It's available on the Government of Canada website. The federal government has helped to facilitate the shipment of 31.2 million rapid tests from 4 different companies. Unfortunately, the deployment is where the challenge is, and we've only seen, of those 31.2 million tests that have been shipped to provinces for distribution, 5.8 million distributed to communities, to local health agencies specifically, Mr. Chair. I don't think this is an opportunity, and I wouldn't want to point fingers here. I don't think that's appropriate. Provinces have a very difficult time right now. Healthcare is their area of jurisdiction. But if there's a concern about rapid tests being distributed to communities, let's face fact and recognize what the actual situation is, with a view to improving it. First question goes to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, if I could. There are things in the fall economic statement which finds its which is expressed now in Bill C-14. This is what we'll see go forward, the vision of the economic statement. There's things in there, Mr. Woodruff, that focus on certainly COVID-19, but other priorities that are central to the challenges of our day, like climate change. If you look at it, and I hope you've had a chance to read the bill, there's money to help homeowners make energy efficient improvements to their homes. There's funding for charging and refueling stations. These are things that certainly my constituents have called for. Great to see it put into place. Do you have a challenge with this sort of an approach? Because climate change is, I believe, the central challenge of our time. Wouldn't you agree?
It's certainly one of the biggest challenges of our time. I don't dispute the reality of climate change, and I don't have strong views on most of the rest of that bill. The main focus that we have, the main concern we have, is the debt ceiling. You know, I would note that there is an easier way to get these measures passed, is to produce a federal budget, and we would welcome seeing a robust federal budget, and then we can debate the validity of the policies contained in it.
A budget is going to be presented, Mr. Woodruff.
Great.
So does that mean then that the view of the Taxpayers Federation has changed? Because, and I'm quoting here one of your directors, Kevin Gaudet, who said, and I quote, "We don't believe," on the part of the Federation, so you're speaking for the group, "we don't believe that there's such thing as man-made climate change." Gaudet said, that this is from the report, adding that initiatives such as cap and trade are in no way proved to reduce CO2 emissions. So does that mean that the organization now believes that climate change is a human-made phenomenon?
Yes. Well, and I should say, when I say that when he's speaking on behalf of the CTF, we don't actually have a corporate view on those issues because we're not an environmental organization. I
think any I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm running out of time. I think any organization worth its salt will recognize, even those that are focused on the economy, especially those focused on the economy, will recognize Mr. Woodruff.
Peter, we'll have to allow Mr. Woodruff to respond. Go ahead, Mr. Woodruff.
But I absolutely agree that man-made climate change is real and that it is a serious concern.
Okay, well, that's good to know, but it's interesting that one of your directors is of a different point of view. I don't mean to.
12 years ago, with respect,
it's good to see that things have evolved.
Certainly,
it's not an attack here, but I just
point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order.
Yeah,
Mr. Fast, what's your point of order?
Relevance. We're not talking about climate change. We're talking about Bill C-14.
Yeah. So
that's not a point of order. In fact, in C-14, there is some things that relate to climate change. Mr. Fragiskatis.
That's true. But why am I not surprised that?
Let's go to the question.
Conservative colleagues haven't read the part of the bill that focuses on climate change.
No, don't accuse anybody of anything. Let's go to the question.
To Mr. Cochrane, if I could, because I'm wrapping up on time here.
You were.
I take your points, but at the same time, are you making the argument that government can spend endlessly? Because I do agree that the programs put in place by the government were an emergency situation and needed to respond to a crisis. They're expensive, but they were absolutely necessary and have kept the country going. But there should be fiscal responsibility as an overall guiding approach. Isn't that the case?
And keep it fairly tight, Mr. Cochrane.
Yeah, thank you for the question. First of all, I spent 8 years getting it, so I'm going to correct and say doctor. I said in my presentation that the fact that the government has access to unlimited financial resources doesn't mean that spending is unlimited, because those financial resources have effects in the material economy. And that's where the concern needs to come in. I will specifically respond to Mr. Woodruff and Mr. Moody's comments about the debt ceiling, that focusing on this, as Mr. Woodruff referred to other policies as blunt instruments, this blunt instrument is just inviting disastrous brinksmanship like we saw in the US around the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is a meaningless thing that really just serves to make us feel good, considering every dollar that the Canadian government spends into the economy becomes someone else's asset in the non-federal economy. Mr. Moody wants to equate the federal government to the households. I don't know about Mr. Moody. I don't have my own bank. The federal government has its own bank. That's how it's able to spend money into existence. The concern is what happens when it's in the economy.
Mr. Cochran, I don't want to get into a debate between witnesses. We might have to go there, but if the others want to respond at some point, go ahead. We'll turn to Mr. St. Marie, followed by Mr. Julian. 5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, everyone. First off, Ms. Bédard and Ms. Laurent, I want to say that I really found your testimony shocking. These reception halls, maple sugar producers, self-employed workers are going through so much in the context of this pandemic. The programs are not well adapted or are imperfect. It's really quite touching to hear you. It's incredible, and I hope that your members will be able to get through this crisis. My first question will be for Ms. Laurent. Go from 250 maple sugar producers to less than 140. This is devastating. Last year, you said it yourselves, you had $300,000 of inventory set up that was lost. All those weddings, receptions over the summer. So an entire season. And then now here we are. It's the second year of these events being canceled. So I'm wondering, the measures that we're looking at here, would these measures respond to what your needs actually are? Thank you very much, Mr. Sainte-Marie. Yes, so we're talking about $300,000 that had already been invested to start the season in 2020. But in my case, our personal debt load was $1 million if you include overhead, etc. All members of my association are in the same situation. Are existing programs well suited to our industry? The answer is definitely not. When you look at the wage subsidy, unfortunately, our companies have been closed consistently over the last 12 months, and that was up until June 2021. We will not at all have resumed operations, so that wage subsidy is not well adapted to our industry. I would add to this, the system, that loan for regional enterprises, that is essentially an interest-free loan. We appreciate that, but how do we reimburse that? How do we pay that back with no revenue? We're having a hard time paying our bills. Some people have had to sell their homes. They're currently living in their operations because they don't have any liquidity. This is a real catastrophe for these businesses. And the only support they have is refundable loans without interest. That's appreciated. But unfortunately, there is no view as to how they can reimburse these debts in the medium or longer term. When you look at other loans, $100,000 with a $20,000 amount. If you look at the amounts offered for our industry, it's as though each establishment could receive $20,000 if you're looking at this particular program, because these other systems are refundable, so this is also not well adapted. So $20,000 is the equivalent of overhead for operations for 2 weeks approximately. Thank you. So from what I gather, the government's really going to have to find some programs that meet your needs. You can't survive 2 years like this with no revenue. Thank you. I have limited time, so my next questions are for Ms. Bédard, and then I'll try to get back to you at my next round of questions a little later. Thank you. Madame Bédard, 3 million workers, the self-employed, since the beginning of this pandemic. We've seen programs that are not real well targeted to your members. There seem to be many breaches in the system. The responses that your members have received from CRA agents, just this really won't cut it. It just makes no sense. Before you comment on that, can you give us some examples of self-employed workers? What kind of businesses are we talking about? What do they do, so that we have a really clear idea of who you represent? And then you can comment on the other point I made. It's a wide range of activities. It could be actors, singers, bands. It can be the manicurist, the hairstylist, social media managers, people who are responsible for websites. It could be accountants. It could be business groups. Given that the status of a self-employed worker is not well defined, there's a bit of a mix that people get mixed up in their minds. So you have these various categories. These self-employed workers are not incorporated. It could be often, a cleaning lady. I mean, it's all of these services that you and I need, but they're not actually recognized for the work they do, these individuals. And Mr. Sainte-Marie, as to making a comment on what you referred to, the problems that we're having with the CRA, I think if this was well defined, like a wage earner, if an employee asks question about his or her file, it's clear. There's an answer as to what can be done or cannot be done. Now, a self-employed worker, nobody knows. At this point, they're being asked questions that just make no sense. Some people are completely shut down. We have to appeal. We help them appeal some of these decisions, but these delays are cumulative. If you're looking at 18 weeks now, and then you have to appeal something, then it takes even more weeks. And when things have shut down, you haven't received CERB because you don't have any employees, you don't have a wage subsidy, you're not admissible because you don't have a business number to other programs on those loans that we were talking about, interest free. So there's really nothing other than CERB last summer. It's really difficult. It's very distressing for people. Since January 18th, there have been 3 attempted suicide attempts, and we really don't want people to deal with this. We want people to get help. We know that self-employed workers really need this support to survive. Most of these people's businesses are set up at their own homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bedard. Just on that point, could you send the clerk a letter explaining I think what you feel is the harassment from CRA to self-employed workers, and send it to our clerk, and we might talk about it and see if we can send it on.
Plaisir. Yes, Abe, please too. Very good idea, says Mr. Sainte-Marie.
You hear the same. It's a lack of understanding of what a self-employed worker is. Mr. Julian, followed by Mr. Kelly.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et Madame Bedard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Madame Bedard, your testimony was very touching. We'll certainly be following up on that, and I'll have questions for you later. I wanted to welcome all of our witnesses, and we certainly hope that you and your families are safe and healthy during this pandemic. Thank you for attending this meeting here today.
My first questions will go to Dr. Cochrane, because we are dealing with C14, which is linked to the fall economic statement. As I'm sure you're aware, the fall economic statement really forecasts significant cuts in program expenses for this next fiscal year, which begins in a couple of weeks. And so there is, I think, great concern that the government is looking to reduce supports at a time when the third wave is hitting Canada tragically. And yet in the fall economic statement and in C14, there is absolutely no reference to measures that would actually help bolster the resources available to provide supports for Canadians. And I know that Canadians for Tax Fairness has talked about this, the importance of establishing a fair tax system and putting in place, like other countries have, a wealth tax, and responding to the pandemic in a way that we did in the Second World War, where we put in place an excess profits tax, and instead the government seems to be basically giving a blank check to companies that are profiteering during this pandemic. The billionaires have increased their wealth by over $60 billion. Canadian banks are reaping record profits with government liquidity supports that are record. So in that context, how do you feel about the government's refusal to put in place a wealth tax and a pandemic profits tax so that we have the resources and the wherewithal to provide all the supports for people that you spoke of so eloquently during your presentation?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's incredibly misguided not to have these as part of what I call the fiscal toolkit. I voiced some disagreement with Mr. Woodrick and Mr. Moody, but I will echo their call for a budget. And I know one is coming, but it is, I agree, unacceptable that we've been 2 years without a budget. A budget should have come out, even though it was early days of the pandemic, stating there's a high degree of uncertainty, but here's what we think we're actually going to do. There was a lot of goodwill on the part of Canadians for the government, kind of muddling its way through, as long as it was doing what it could to support people. If they do not maintain those supports going forward, it risks letting a lot of people start falling through the cracks, because even as the economy, the macroeconomy, looks like it's recovering, there's going to be a lot of people who are being left behind in that. We've heard talk about this K-shaped recovery where some people are weathering the situation just fine. And as a report from Canadians for Tax Fairness showed, through the first 3 quarters of 2020, 34 of 100 corporations that we looked at had record profits. So while the economy for most people was not great, for some it was excellent. And we need to use all of the tools that are available to us, like wealth taxes, like excess profit taxes, in order to keep the money moving and ensure that the support exists for those who otherwise will fall through the cracks.
Thank you for that. And we have the singular illustration of the Spanish flu, and what we have seen in all the analyses done after the Spanish flu is for lower income people in that period a century ago, it took over a decade for them to have in place the financial resources that they had before the Spanish flu pandemic hit. And so we're dealing with a situation where people are struggling to put food on the table, struggling to make ends meet. And yet the federal government seems absolutely unwilling to even put in place the rudimentary foundations of a fair tax system. So my second question goes to that. We've had people come before this committee and kind of brush off the idea of tackling overseas tax havens. The Parliamentary Budgetary Officer projects that we'll lose $25 billion this year. These are in tax revenues that go to overseas tax havens. That could provide so much support for people, as you mentioned, childcare, things like affordable housing, all these things that Canadians are forced to struggle without. Pharmacare, of course, that Liberals and Conservatives said no to, but I think Canadians will come back to them in the next election on that. So all these things that are essential for Canadians that the government brushes aside, and yet there's been no action on ending tax havens. How important is taking concerted effort against overseas tax havens to provide that foundation that you spoke of in your presentation?
It's absolutely, it's incredibly important. These tax havens are used by the wealthiest of the wealthiest of the wealthiest. This is not an instrument that's available to you or I. The very use of it is automatically raising questions about why is this being done? This is implicated in issues with what's called base erosion, and profit shifting. So companies are able to move where they're recording profits to offshore low tax havens when the work is actually happening here. It's just a way of exploiting the rules. Often they're operating right at the edge of what's legal. in order to just maintain their pools of wealth, which, again, as I described, is because of our trickle-up economy. They didn't work harder for it. They didn't earn it through any sort of virtue or contribution to society. It's just a function of the fact that they are asset owners and they want to hold on to as much of it as they possibly can, and then will spend it in ways that have distortionary effects on society. How many people earn incredible incomes helping them figure out how to massage the rules so that they can get away with parking their money in a low tax haven while also enjoying all of the benefits that come from living in Canada?
Okay, we're going to have to go to Mr. Kelly and then followed by Mr. Fraser.
Actually, Mr. Fox is going to take this round and Ms. Jansen will take the final round.
All right, thank you, Pat. Mr. Fox first, and then.
Okay,
Mr.
thanks,
Fraser.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm sure you didn't give me a heads up there, I guess, so I wouldn't step on Mr. Julian again. Sorry about that, Peter. Thank you again to the witnesses for your testimony. I appreciate it very much. You know, the fall economic updates provided Canadians with the information that they could expect a $381 billion deficit this year, with maybe another $100 billion more of post-COVID spending. Those are monumental numbers. And now this bill presented to us that we're debating today is asking us to increase our debt ceiling. And you know, in the words of Mr. Moody, I hate to be considered a Mr. Orange's credit card authorization person that's going to actually authorize an increased spending limit to get us into further debt levels that are possibly unwarranted and certainly unjustified. But I would like to point out that former parliamentary budget officer Kevin Page, who reads financial statements and updates for a living, made the comment that he was unable to follow the money in the fall economic update statement. Now we're being asked to provide approval for increased spending outside of a budget. It is actually budget time. It was budget time over a year ago, and we haven't had a budget. You've rightly said, both Mr. Woodrick and Mr. Moody, that it's time for a budget. And if some of these measures would be included in a budget, there would be the opportunity to show Canadians in a transparent way where the money is going to go. As it is, there's a lack of transparency and Canadians just don't know where the money's going. Could you comment any further on that?
Go ahead. Mr. Moody, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree. Canadians are really want to see where this money is going. I've tried to piece the puzzles together as well, and I just can't. And so it's shocking to me how much money is going out the door, and I do agree that a lot of it was necessary for sure at the front end. But there needs to be accountability and transparency. And so, I don't know if I have much more to say than that, other than we need a budget. And certainly the answer is not in offshore monies, like Mr. Cochrane says. It's that's just fantasy land stuff. But in other words, but all in all, we need transparency and accountability.
And Mr. Woodrick, what would be your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's mostly all been said here. I mean, I think that you know, perhaps what's most alarming about the ask for the increase in the debt ceiling and the planned $100 billion spending where we don't know where it's going to go is that that's explicitly stated as being after the pandemic. You know, I think that the government has a strong case that when the pandemic hit, you've got pretty much unanimity across the country that this is an emergency. You had to spend money you didn't plan on. We get that. I think everybody gets that. After the pandemic is a different story. I think it's a very different argument for the government to propose permanent new spending without any debate. And they're essentially saying conveniently all the things that we want to spend on that are new permanent spending miraculously align with the things they wanted to do before the pandemic, but didn't have the money to do. So if the argument is we didn't have the money before the pandemic, it's very hard to now say, oh, well, suddenly after the pandemic, we're able to spend money on these things that we couldn't find the money for beforehand.
Okay,
Last
thank
question.
you. Okay. Could you offer any practical suggestions, like areas where the government could make life easier for Canadians by reducing red tape or providing tax cuts during this time?
Yeah, well, look, first of all, I think when it comes to stimulus, first of all, the minister, as she's pointed out herself, has sort of preloaded the stimulus. Canadians want to spend money. So, obviously coming out on the other end of this pandemic, if Canadians are feeling good, they want to travel, they want to spend, that will be a large part of the stimulus. So the idea that we need to spend more should maybe be set aside. In terms of tax relief, I mean, looking particularly at small businesses and offering them relief, we proposed last year, for example, a temporary suspension of the small business tax rate, say for a year or two. That would allow some businesses to get back on their feet over time and sort of make up for a lot of the struggles that they've had to go through over the course of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you all. Turning to Mr. Fraser, followed by Mr. St. Marie and Mr. Julian. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And look, I'll take a different view than our chairperson when he said he didn't want a debate between the witnesses. I thought this was one of the most engaging conversations that I'd seen in committee in quite some time. And maybe I'll go right to the points of disagreement between, and I was going to say Mr. Cochrane, but I think you corrected the record, and I should acknowledge Dr. Cochrane and Mr. Moody as well. And although I think Mr. Woodrick may have something to add to this debate, I'll limit it to the first two just in the interest of time. So Dr. Cochrane, you've given essentially one of the most concise explanations of modern monetary theory that I've ever really heard, in the sense that we can spend money into existence, and as you've described, and that the limit is really on the real economy's ability to soak that up. Mr. Moody, I'm curious, and the first question will be for you. The Bank of Canada usually sets an inflation target of 2%. We haven't seen inflation to that magnitude in years. The evidence before the committee over the course of the summer, I think it was former Governor Pelot's, who indicated that deflation represents a very real risk during this pandemic. I'm curious as to your thoughts on Dr. Cochrane's submission and whether, if you don't agree that maybe MMT is the way to go, which I expect you don't, is there a problem with, particularly since we're at the effective lower bound of interest rates presently, is the inflation target wrong, or is there a different way to get there?
Well, I'll just say that I'm not an economist. I'm a tax expert, and I've spent many years studying tax, and I practice tax, and so that's where I will say that talking to my economist friends, I do think there's concern about inflationary pressures. Am I the guy to ultimately say with certainty that that's right? No, I'm not. But am I concerned about it? Sure, I am. And so with that, I'll just end it there, I guess.
Sure. And before I go to Dr. Cochrane, I'll say, look, I think we all have to be looking at long-term risk, including inflationary pressures. But I can't ignore the elephant in the room. The deflationary risk, to me, is enormous. When I see the shock to our economy that COVID-19 represents, the risk, I remember in the early days in particular, was that there wouldn't be businesses here to support an economy on the back end because their customers wouldn't be there because the businesses were originally shut down. It was sort of a supply and demand shock at the same time. I'm curious, Dr. Cochrane, though, if I've poorly articulated your submission, why is it that you think there's not necessarily endless spending, but that we can manage, but the government's ability to print money into existence, so to speak, is really the right way to do it? And when would you put the brakes on, and how would you put the brakes on if the real economy failed to soak up some of the cash?
Thank you very much for inviting this discussion. I will acknowledge that I learned much of this through MMT. The basics of what I described don't actually require MMT. A lot of it is just straight up basic Keynesian understanding of how the monetary system works. And when I was first exposed to the ideas of MMT, which I found shocking, I wanted to confirm, is this how Canada's monetary system works? And in the course of that, I found a document that I would highly recommend to everyone from the Parliamentary Library called How the Bank of Canada Creates Money for the Federal Government. And it describes how, when the federal government is running a deficit, the Bank of Canada creates its liability, the assets of the government of Canada, and it creates its asset in the form of the securities that it holds, the treasuries, and then it can sell a portion of those off into off to the public while holding on to a certain portion. During the pandemic, the portion that the Bank of Canada has held has risen, which has allowed the government of Canada to spend the money that it needs to spend. Now, how do we decide when enough is enough? I'm actually going to affirm in this area something that Mr. Woodrick said, which is that we need more study. We need more understanding of the things that are happening in different parts of the country, in different sectors. Where are prices rising? Where are they falling? The inflation level, this 2%, that's a statistical artifact. It doesn't tell us what's happening to the price of toilet paper or the price of houses or the price of something in Calgary. So we need more understanding of what's happening in different parts of the country. And that was another key component of conducting World War II, the economy during World War II. We had extensive study to understand where actual materials were moving, what prices were being attached to those materials. And then that allowed the government to identify, here's profiteering that's going on, or here's legitimate price increases that are coming because of whatever other reasons. So we need to disaggregate our understanding of the macroeconomy and understand the economy through many more lenses.
Okay, we are going to have to end it there. We'll go to Mr. St. Marie, Mr. Julian, followed by Ms. Jensen. Mr. St. Marie.
Oui, merci, Wayne.
Yes, thank you, Wayne. Ms. Laurent, you really did a good job explaining the fact that your types of businesses, sugar bushes, are feeling that the programs in place are not meeting their needs. What are you asking the government for? What could be done? So changing the current programs, like the rent subsidy or wage subsidy, so that people could access that? Or do you think you need a specific program for your sector? And if so, what need would be met? Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Marie. Actually, what we're asking for is an extension of the wage subsidy so we can enjoy that during our recovery in 2022. So we are planning until the summer 2022, and we would like to have that wage subsidy. The regional recovery fund should be a loan, with part of it being a subsidy, because reimbursing that loan would be very difficult. We hope that the CUSA program is 100% of a subsidy, so that we would not have to reimburse the $100,000 that was granted to these companies. And an emergency fund would have been greatly appreciated for these business owners who remain without revenue for the next 12 months. That's a large number of businesses, hotels, reception rooms that are basically empty. Those events are not happening. The events that had been postponed to 2021 are now being postponed to 2022. So it really is catastrophic for our industry. If you think of these major banquet halls in the various big cities that are basically revenueless and they have been since last spring, and that have nothing to look at for the next 12 months. It's extremely painful. Certainly, these programs, I want to thank you also, because the Canadian government has done a lot for our businesses. Without our government's support, I can confirm that I would not be here today having this discussion with you. Unfortunately, my business would have failed and gone bankrupt. So I really am grateful for the speed at which the Canadian government responded at the beginning of the crisis. But at this point, I think adapting the available programs to some industries that are hard hit, I'm not sure there are too many other industries who have lost 80 or 85% of their business and revenues and can expect another 80% loss until 2022. This is catastrophic for these business owners. We have already lost dozens or maybe even hundreds of them, and the epidemic is obvious. If I look at the sugar bushes throughout Quebec, we had 240 of them. We've already lost 100, and I can assure you that if I had not worked as a volunteer to save them all individually, there would probably be at most 50 of them remaining at this point. So I'm proud that I saved 100 of them or so. I've worked really hard, but I unfortunately need some help. Thank you.
Thank you both. Turning then to Mr. Julian, followed by Ms. Jensen.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Laurent. Thank you, Ms. Bédard. Your testimony was really touching. What I'm concerned about in everything you've just said, when you speak, Madame Bédard, about the suicides, and when you talk about complete closure of certain sugar bushes, Madame Laurent, what concerns me is that the federal government is considering major cutbacks or major cuts to these supports offered to these businesses and individuals. So as of April 1st, in other words, 2 weeks from now, the next fiscal year, the federal government is planning dramatic cuts, practically 50% in program expenditures, 50% cutbacks. This is government-wide for Canada. So this is why I have the same question for each of you. What do you predict may happen if there is no additional support for self-employed workers? What do you expect may happen if there is no further support for these reception halls and maple sugar producers in Quebec? You said, Madame Laurent, that you saved 100 of them. So you went from there was a drop from 250 to 150 of these sugar bushes. How many will remain if the federal government does not continue to provide support and does not then add even more support in the future? Madame Bédard, perhaps I can start? Well, actually, I can confirm that if the federal support programs come to a stop for our industry, it will be catastrophic. It already is catastrophic. However, I can't say that support programs are really supporting us because, as I said, no program is well adapted to our needs. So those business owners have not really received any support. Some received the FARR. Unfortunately, the sound cut out for a minute. So this is an important issue for businesses. If it can't be worse than it is at this point because I'm being fully honest with you because we don't have access to these supports.
Ce sera un sauvetage qu'on aura besoin pour notre industrie.
Or the industry will need to be saved.
Thank you, Ms. Laurent. Ms. Bedard, I think we seem to be having a little trouble with the sound. Mr. Bedard, could you give a quick answer and then we'll have to move ahead?
En fait, the economic recovery will happen as vaccines also are distributed. So what we can expect is until the end of June. So that is good for self-employed workers. Now, as to this business number and commercial loans, I'm talking about massage therapists, hairstylists, all these individuals who have to pay rent in these small businesses. So it would be better for them to have access to that type of support. Now, as to audit or checks, there should be no extra extrapolation.
Thank you all. Just on this discussion, I know this hearing is on C14, but a lot of this discussion really relates to our COVID-19 expenses and potential solutions. So let's keep that in mind as well. Maybe members of the committee need to carry this forward over to the other discussion in some way. We are rapidly going to run out of time, so I'd like to hold Ms. Jansen and then Ms. Sirowitz to 4 minutes each and give Elizabeth May the opportunity for one question. So Ms. Jansen.
Yes, thank you. The Business Council of Canada, Mr. Woodruff, has said that the pandemic ignited an explosion in public spending and debt. Federal debt to GDP before COVID was 30%, now it's 50%. Since we were told by the finance minister that the stimulus package was preloaded, which I'm assuming is meant to explain why they spent most out of all the G7 partners, and now looking what appears to be a plan in C14 to get permission to spend another somewhere in the range of $700 billion with a $100 billion slush fund and a $600 billion debt ceiling increase, should Canadians be worried that the Liberal government is out of control?
I think that Canadians definitely should demand and expect to have a budget. A government wants to spend money. It's very simple. You come forward and explain what your plan is and make your case for it. They're not doing that. They are using the pandemic as an excuse to not present a budget. I was forgiving of that last year. I think most people were. But we've seen, you look around the world, all our G7 peers have managed to present budgets. Every province in Canada except Nova Scotia has been able to. In fact, Ontario will present 3 budgets. Since their 2019 budget was after the federal budget. They'll have presented 3 budgets before the federal government has presented 1. So I think just in terms of accountability and transparency, it is irresponsible, and they're out of excuses. They need to present a budget as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Mr. Moody, the finance minister has talked about a preloaded stimulus plan to explain the overspending we've seen so far. So we're being asked to vote on this $100 billion stimulus spending and a debt ceiling increase of over $600 billion with Bill C-14. Without even a budget in place, do you think that we as parliamentarians can truly vote responsibly on this bill? I mean, I personally feel that I have a gun to my head since they're tying these figures to the support that Canadians and small businesses need to survive the pandemic.
Well, I think the short answer is no. I mean, how do you vote on something that you don't really know where the plan is? And so I agree with Mr. Woodruff as well that, we need a budget, we need a plan. And that's why I use the simplistic example of Mr. Apple and Mr. Orange. And one of them has a plan, one doesn't. And the one that has a plan typically will follow that plan, you hope, and make logical steps. So if you don't have a plan, I don't know how logically you could vote on something like this. That's just my personal opinion.
And I just asked Mr. Woodruff, would you agree that we as parliamentarians basically have a gun to our head at this point in time?
Yeah, and then I would point out that the government, I mean, there was a recess at Christmas. If there was such great urgency, it would have been perfectly acceptable to extend sitting of Parliament, have debate on the bill, and not demand now that you roll everything together and essentially frame it as if you don't support this bill, then you don't care about Canadians.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tamara. Going to Ms. Sirowitz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to everyone for this, I think, important conversation. My first questions are actually to Mr. Cochrane. Mr. Cochrane, I think that you would get most Canadians to agree that tax fairness is important not only to people my riding of Davenport, but I know to Canadians right across this country. It's one of the top issues we all talk about. Just based on the conversation today, I'm not quite sure if you know this, but our federal government, since we were elected, we've spent over $1 billion to fight tax evasion and to fight tax or to close down sort of tax loopholes. Did you know that we've committed that money and we've been spending it?
Yeah, and my organization gave your government kudos for doing so. There's just much more that needs to be done and can be done. There's many more tools in the fiscal toolkit that your government's just not using. Some of them they've made hints that they will use, but have not said concretely what that will actually look like, despite widespread calls to implement these kinds of measures to create the fiscal space that's needed to address both the pandemic aftermath and the climate crisis going forward.
And then, sorry, I'm just realizing,
we're not plugged in. So, and then my second part of the question to you is, did you know that we've also committed an additional $600 million to continue to tackle tax evasion in the fall economic statement? And then the other thing I want to make sure that you were aware of, and it's important for everybody to be aware of as well, but there's some additional measures that we have promised, like taxing digital giants like Google and Facebook, limiting stock option deductions for high-income individuals, and taxing non-resident foreign owners of Canadian real estate. Are you also aware that all of that has been committed to in our fall economic statement as well?
Yeah, I'm aware of those. The digital giants taxation is again something that we gave big kudos for, although thumbs down to delaying the implementation for a year, which is costly. And actually, if I could pose a question that we have, will that tax apply to Uber and Lyft? We aren't clear
so
if they are
Mr.
considered
Cochrane,
digital services.
I'm so sorry, but I'm not going to be able to answer your question.
Okay.
It's my 4 minutes, but I do want to make sure that you know and that all Canadians know that we've put a substantial amount of effort into this. It is important for us, and we'll continue to be fighting tax.
Point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Julian.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. There's not been a single conviction from the Paradise Papers, Panama Papers, Bahama Papers.
Not a point of order.
Not really a point of order. It's a point of debate. But go ahead, Ms. Zerowitz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
And you got a minute.
The second thing I would mention is that there seemed to be some indication that the emergency supports or the supports that we've been giving haven't been positively impacting those on the lower end of the income scale. And so, Mr. Cochrane, I wonder if you could maybe respond to this. A recent Statistics Canada report indicated that households in the lowest income quintile increased their share of disposable income from 6.1% in the first quarter to a high of 7.2% in the second quarter of 2020. While those in the highest income quintile decreased their share of disposable income from 40.1% to 37.7% over the same period. Would you comment on this?
That just shows what can be done through government action. We have seen unprecedented levels of spending that had this unexpected positive impact. I mean, unexpected to many commentators. There were lots who said, put money out there, it will help address inequality. So I'm here to say, go further, do more. It's great. We need to lift everyone fully out of poverty. A cut to poverty levels is great. Go further, do more. You have the fiscal space to do it. Increase the fiscal space by implementing tax measures that keep the money moving so it doesn't remain the power of the wealthy.
Thank you all. Last question to you, Elizabeth May, and then we'll let it close.
I have to say thank you very much, Chairman, for this kindness, and to all my colleagues and the witnesses were so interesting today. My question is to Dr. Cochrane. Given that we need to have, I believe, we need to have new sources of revenue to ensure that as the economy picks up post-pandemic, we're able to bring in social programs that address the inequities that have become so apparent through COVID. Given the choice, if you had to pick one measure, is it the wealth tax? Is it the excess profit tax? Which one do you think you would most like to see in Chrystia Freeland's next budget?
Absolutely a wealth tax. It would bring in more revenue, and it would have some of the same effects as an excess profits tax. And we are alone among many of our allies in not having some form of wealth tax. So it's in the fiscal toolkit, just need to make use of it.
Okay, thank you to all witnesses for your presentations today. We had a very sincere thank you. I think we had an interesting discussion that covered a lot of angles. And to you, Lauren, congratulations on setting up an organization during this crisis to get your point across. That's critical, because I think it shows what Canadians can do when they come together to try and push their point at governments at all levels. We may not always agree, but getting that information out there is critical. So thank you all for your presentations today. We wish you well. For committee members, we've got a meeting tomorrow now at 10 o'clock. It was originally at 11. So remember, we're starting at 10 o'clock Ottawa time tomorrow. And then the Conservatives get to go to their convention after our meeting. So they'll have a good send off. With that, thank you all once again. Meeting adjourned. Bye-bye.